victorious, it would be at the cost of thousands more rivermen and valormen. The time has come. Bryndon cut down another cataphract before lifting the visor of his helm. He reached for his war horn and quickly blew hard on it. He put it away in his knapsack before blocking a spear's thrust with his shield. And he replied in kind with a sword slice at his face, eviscerating him from his eye to the apple protruding from his throat. And from the hills surrounding them, the infantry of the Riverlands and the Vale emerged from hiding, and they charged. Roaring their battle cries and the words of their noble houses, they descended upon the Volanten infantry and cavalry, completely trapping them and cutting off any escape. Forward, knights! Break them! Push them back! Bryndon roared before stabbing another young nobleman in the chest. As he wrenched out faith, he sliced across at another young nobleman's throat. They were the last he had slain before men threw down their weapons and banners and surrendered. Bryndon panted as the men all raised their weapons and voices and cheered their victory. Bryndon glanced at Edmure. He was largely unharmed. His armor was spent with cuts and thrusts, but no wounds. The blood caking his armor was not his own, Bryndon was proud to see. Edmure's sword was blooded, and he was exhausted. But he raised his sword with all other men and cheered at their victory. Bryndon proudly cheered for his nephew as well as their victory. Notes: the defeat of another army, and now the Allies are one step closer towards Lysan lands on mainland Essos. Chapter 129, Meeting the Lion and the Viper. Summary: Ashura greets visitors in Winterfell. Notes: see the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Ashura 18. Ashura beamed as she cradled Diana in her arms whilst Ros cradled Halric in hers, and Melania was entertaining Lyanna at the other side of the nursery whilst old Nan was reading a story to Prydain. Your father will be home soon. Though he fights for a king that doesn't deserve his loyalty, he will be home soon. And when he is, he will never be far from your side again. I promise you all this. Her gaze turned to the door when she heard it creak open slightly. She looked up to see Maester Wallers stood there. She noticed the urgent look on his face when he caught her eyes. Ashura looked back down on Diana. Her second daughter was drifting to sleep. Ashura carefully stood up, gently holding Diana whilst taking care to not wake her up. Maester, she asked in a whisper. My lady, we have 2 visitors of noble birth in the great hall requesting an audience, he whispered in reply. Now. Whom are our visitors, Wallers? She asked. Lord Tyrion of House Lannister and Prince Doran of House Martell, my lady. Gods, Doran. It feels like 100 years since I last saw him, in the Water Gardens. And as for Tyrion Lannister, I have heard plenty of the second son of Tywin Lannister. The salacious, drinking and cunning dwarf son of the old lion. It would be interesting to witness a conversation between the two. Very well. I shall come at once, she said. She turned around and walked to old Nan. Could you put her to bed? Of course, milady, she replied with a toothless smile. She turned to Prydain. Come, milord. Let's put your sister to bed. She is tired. Ashura beamed at each of her children before she left the nursery. I could spend all day with my beautiful little children. My handsome little boys. And my adorable little girls. But she was quickly reminded of her duties when she closed the nursery door behind her and followed Wallers from the nursery to the great hall. It wasn't the first time that she acted on Ned's behalf as Lady of Winterfell and sitting on the high seat of Winterfell. However, this was the first time that she would meet with representatives from a Lord Paramount's family. House Martell and House Lannister visiting us. All we need now is Mace Tyrell or one of his kin, and then we will have established important trading connections with all kingdoms of West Eos. And yet I leave out the Crown lands. Thanks in no small part to Rhaegar, and his stupid paranoia thinking the North and House Stark as his enemies still. Ashura looked down at her guests. Doran, she recognized from her visits to the Water Gardens and to Sunspear as a girl. He looked as wise and old for his age as always. And then there was Tyrion Lannister. Whilst not as handsome as his elder brother, he maintained a courteous smile and looked with interest at his surroundings in the great hall. Prince Doran. Lord Tyrion. Please be welcome here in Winterfell. I am sorry that I could not arrange a suitable reception for you both. Had I known that you were both coming, better arrangements could have been made, Ashura said. None are required, Ashura. It is pleasant to see you once again. And in such good circumstances. You seem to be happy as Lady of Winterfell, Doran complimented. I am, Doran. And glad to see you again. And how is Melorio? She asked. She is well. Though is upset that her homeland battles with ours across the narrow sea, he replied. True. Norfo's armies battle with Ned's across the narrow sea. But Ned should end this war soon. With both Daltala and Maegor Blackfyr dead. Ashura now turned to Tyrion Lannister. And you, Lord Tyrion, welcome to Winterfell. And I am glad that our families can meet in peace after the recent conflict which pitted us against each other in the Crown Lands, she said. As am I, Lady Stark. And I would like to express my interest in visiting Winterfell, and my hopes in visiting the Wall, he replied. Ah. A magnificent spectacle to be sure. Though not nearly as tall as Casterly Rock. But the Night's Watch will honor your visit and treat you as royalty, for they have not had the honor of a royal visit in over a century, Ashura replied, drawing on her experiences of traveling to the Wall with Ned and Benjen soon after she had given birth to Lyanna. Now. How might I be of service to you both? She asked. The two guests looked at each other. The dwarf son of Tywin Lannister gestured to the Prince of Sunspear to be the first. And so, Doran cleared his throat before he spoke. Ashura, it is no secret to Dawn of the great and vast improvements in which the North has built in the North and for your allies in the Riverlands, the Iron Islands, the Stormlands and the Vale. I would consider it a great honor if the same was to be granted to Dawn. Any improvements in particular? Ashura asked. The aqueducts and Valyrian roads would be a high priority. As well as, perhaps, canals being built across Dawn, to transport water to potential spots that could become fertile farmland once provided with plentiful water, he asked. And in exchange, Dawn would be willing to pay a price of 200,000 gold dragons and begin a trading agreement of Dornish olives, lemons, spices, pomegranates, oranges and wine in exchange for northern minerals and metals. Ashura glanced at Maester Wallers. She gestured for him to come closer. He did, and their discussion was discussed in whispers. For she knew that this trade could be of huge benefit to the North. What do you think? She asked, hoping that he would not be blinded by his age-old dislike of Dawn and its people from being raised as a bitter Reachman. My lady, I think that this could be of great importance to the North. Though his idea of canals in Dawn's desert seems unlikely, he pointed out. No, I don't think so. Doran is not the sort of man that follows his dreams on a whim. I think that this could be possible. If built correctly and the correct places were built for water to flow freely into the correct spots to build farms. I think that we have an understanding, Doran, she said with a smile. My thanks, Ashura, he replied with a rare smile from Doran. Before Ashura turned to Tyrion Lannister, who was still looking around at the carvings and inscriptions on the walls, of old Stark kings of winter, before he turned to face Ashura. And how might House Stark be of aid to House Lannister? I come on behalf of my good sister, Lady Catelyn, Lady Stark. She has told me much of what the North has built for itself and for its allies from the Riverlands to the Stormlands. All of what it has built for the Riverlands and for the North, I have seen for myself from my journey from Casterly Rock to Winterfell. All of which is incredible and spectacular works. Works which I know would be of enormous benefit to the Westerlands. And we would be glad to build them in my country, as well as forming a formal alliance with House Stark, he said. And what is it in particular that House Lannister would want? The Valyrian roads for one. But also, the aqueducts and the dams, to prevent floods. And in exchange, what is House Lannister prepared to offer? Asked Ashura. The Westerlands is prepared to offer 500,000 gold dragons and a trading agreement of our own agricultural produce, meats and wines in exchange for the rarest of northern minerals such as copper, electrum, zinc, lead and the famed northern ironwood, he offered. Ashura raised a brow at what the Westerlands would offer. You are kind to offer gold and silver. However, I should inform you that with the acquisition of Mirish glass from the recent occupation of the city, the North is in the process of building many new glass gardens to help in the production of food for the North, she explained. Of course, Lady Stark. But, as the Starks always say, winter is coming. I have seen 6 winters in my life so far. Unpleasant experiences to be sure, and I do not know what it would be like in the north, but for all peoples of the north, would it not be best to have an abundance of food? To ensure that there are no hungry mouths in times of winter. For it is safe to have an abundance of food than to have a lack of it, especially when men I have spoken with have told me how people would go hunting in times of winter and are never seen again. Ashura couldn't argue his points. He is a very skilled orator. And he is right. As Ned would say, winter is coming, and when it does, there will need to be as much food as there can be for all peoples of the north, especially the small folk. Agreed, Lord Lannister. I thank you both for your visit to Winterfell, and I would extend the hospitality of House Stark to you both for a few more days whilst we finalize the trading agreements between us before you both return home, she offered with a smile. And now, we have made formal agreements with Dorne and the Westerlands. All that is left are the Reach and the Crown lands. Notes. Now the North has made a trading agreement with both Dorne and the Westerlands. Chapter 130, Teosh and all its riches. Summary. The Iron Fleet set sail for Teosh. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Harlon 14. First Pentos. And now Teosh. Not even the likes of the Red Kraken had done this. Sacking two of the free cities. This war will be looked back on with nostalgia by all Ironborn who fought. Harlon looked ahead from the forecastle of the Iron Kraken. What glorious deeds await us when we crush the Tiroshi fleet. And take the walls. And take the city and all its plunder. Men. Harlon turned around to face his crew, either rowing or taking up arms, ready for the inevitable clash. By sunrise tomorrow, Teosh and all its plunder, its wine and its women, will be yours. They all cheered and either stomped the floor or bashed their weapons against shields or the floor. Fear neither pain nor darkness. For the drowned god welcomes to his hall all who die bravely with axes in their hands and courage in their hearts. Now sail hard and let's do battle with these snail-eating Tiroshi pricks. And show them the iron of the Ironborn. Harlon roared before bashing Salt Wave against his shield. They cheered once again before they resumed rowing to battle. Harlon turned back around to face the waiting Tiroshi ships. The Iron Fleet had 100 ships. And the Teoshis had 150 ships. Though more than half of their ships were merchant vessels, outfitted to fit crew warriors, and even fishing boats were used to form a small wall to protect the harbor itself. Harlon turned his eye to the great Kraken. He saw father hold up a lantern and with his axe in hand. He held the lantern and obscured it with his hand before taking his hand away and then obscuring it again. Steer us to the left. Harlon roared to his steer master, Breaker Loudmouth. Breaker began to steer them to the left. Harlon looked at the first wave of Tiroshi ships sailing towards them. Glorious. Harlon chuckled as he saw a galley sailing towards the Iron Kraken. He turned to his first mate, Vibald Hordil. What glory awaits us when we take this city, Vibald? Will we not agree to ransom it to their magisters, Lord? He asked. No. We take the city for good. And push them out of this war for good. We have a choice here. To end their part in this war for good with one full-scale attack on their city. Or letting them escape this battle with a light sacking. But if we were to do that, we would be able to return whenever the men wanted to sack the city. However, if that were to happen, then there would be nothing left of the city and no loot to plunder by the end. It is best if we were to end Teosha's part in this war and to quench the thirst of the men for battle-won plunder. That is what he, Father, Donnell, Victorian and Robin agreed to when they received orders from Eddard Stark. To move on from attacking merchant ships flying the sails of the Triarchy and scouring for their maritime patrols and take Teosh itself. We will take the city. And end their role in the war. The mainlanders took Myr and like the soft fools that they are, they only occupied it and let the magisters keep the city for only a ransom. We will sack Teosh in such a way that it will take them years to recover, Father decided. No man in the Iron Fleet will complain at the plunder we take in this sacking. One of the free cities themselves, it is bound to have more than enough plunder to threaten to sink the entire Iron Fleet. From the trading cartels, to the Tiroshi banks, to their merchant warehouses in the harbor, the marketplaces and the many manses of the nobility and the wealthy merchants. All shall entice the Ironborn into doing their duty. The Iron Kraken sailed towards the Tiroshi galley, which had its name inscribed on the side, but in Valyrian Glyphs. Fire! Harlon roared. His men fired arrows and threw javelins and axes at the enemy's crew. They should have kept to mercantile ways of life than supporting the ascension of the Triarchy. Harlon bashed Saltwave against his shield for all to hear. Send them down to serve the drowned god. Now with me, lads. Together. Harlon was the first to grab a rope and swing across to the Tiroshi galley. He landed on the hull, swinging Saltwave across at a Tiroshi sailor armed with an arrow. Saltwave cut his head off. His head landed on the hull before Harlon's feet landed on the hull. He turned to face two more men. He sliced Saltwave at one's throat before he eviscerated the other twice with two swift swings at his chest. As his crew all landed aboard the ship, Harlon advanced to the helm. He chopped three more men down as he approached. The captain unsheathed an arrow and cut across at Harlon. Harlon blocked the blow with his shield and cut down onto the arrow with Saltwave with a grunt. Harlon beheaded the ship's captain with a swing of Saltwave before he swung it at another's throat, splitting his head half off before he knocked a third man overboard with his shield. He panted as he looked down at the hull to see his crew had indeed triumphed. Take what loot you want, lads. We've still a battle to fight. Harlon took three more ships as they advanced further into the battle. Harlon constantly looked across at Robin's ship, the Iron Shark. He saw Robin shouting commands with confidence and purpose. May the drowned god watch over you, brother. It was Robin's third battle as a captain, and Harlon still was proud to see him fight as a true Greyjoy would. Harlon looked ahead. He smiled at what he saw. No warships left to fight them. Lord, asked Vibald. Harlon turned to the great Kraken. And he saw father hold up his lantern and obscure it with his hand. Before taking his hand away and then holding a torch against it. Harlon slapped his hands against the balustrade of his ship with a laugh. Sail on, lads. The city is ours. Now, the plunder inside is all ours. His crew cheered as they continued to row, and Harlon stared ahead at Tiosh. Notes. The Tiroshi fleet guarding their home city has been crushed. And now there is nothing left to protect the city from the Ironborn. Chapter 131, Wasting a Chance. Summary. Lucerys pleads with Rhaegar to not waste a chance. Meanwhile, a Lord Paramount has gotten bored of waiting. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Lucerys 14. Lucerys walked inside the small council. He looked around at those gathered. He could see it all on the faces of the nobility who had been invited to the small council as advisors. Men such as Mace Tyrell and Tywin Lannister. They were impatient. The war was being fought in Essos. All whilst they were still in the Crown lands. Idling and doing nothing. Whilst tales and legends were told from travellers and merchants of the battles taking place in Myr, Pentos and Tiosh. We must make ready to sail. It has been too long since the war began and that Eddard Stark took the initiative and began his invasion of the free cities and was joined by his allies from across Westeros. Including my own allies, the Greyjoys. I pray that they are well. Harlon is a good man and a wise one. Rise for the king. At the Lord Commander's words, all stood rigidly by their seats as the king, the queen and the queen mother found their seats. The king invited them all to sit down. Lucerys looked up at the king as he sat down. We need to join the war. The longer we do not, the more glory that Stark shall earn. All of which shall only make the king far angrier and more envious towards him. Which shall only impede his judgment and his decisions towards the Seven Kingdoms and the North in particular. Lord Varys, what news is there from the war? Asked the king. My birds brought me a few important songs this morn, your grace, said Varys. All turned to the Master of Whispers upon hearing that. All the new advisors to the small council, Oberyn Martell, Daemon Marbrand, Kevan Lannister, Mace Tyrell, Paxter Redwine and Randall Tarly all knew well the reputation of Varys and how useful he was at gathering information. Tywin knew personally from his time as Aes Hand of the king. Eddard Stark and his allies have defeated 3 armies that were marching on them. An army of Pentoshi sellswords combined with a Dothraki horde, an army of Volantens and an army of Norvoshi and Kohurik warriors, he announced. And what are they doing now? Asked Tywin Lannister. Lord Lannister, They are currently marching on Lai's most important mainland fortress. It is called Mimebotas. Mimebotas. The great fortress of Lais. It was the most important strategic location of the Triarchy during the Dance of the Dragons before they lent it to sell swords before they marched on the disputed lands. And what of the Iron Fleet? And the fleets of the north, the Riverlands, the Stormlands and the Vale, asked Lucerys. Other than the Iron Fleet, the other ones combined forces under the leadership of Sir Willis Mandaily and have been defeating maritime patrols across the waters of the Narrow Sea controlled by Pentos, Myr and Tioche. They now sail to Volantis to end their contributions to the war. And as for the Iron Fleet, under Quarian Greyjoy's command, they sailed for Tioche, defeated the fleet guarding it and proceeded to sack the city for 2 entire weeks. Lucerys looked up at the king at hearing the news. First Myr and now Tioche. Valerys Daltala must see that he is being pressed into a corner like a hunted beast. Our chances of victory are far greater now. We must pursue this chance if we are to succeed fully. But will the king make the necessary move? He hesitates. For why, I do not know. Out of indecisiveness or out of a desire for the Triarchy and Black Fires to eliminate Stark for him. Whatever the reason, we cannot idle any longer. Lucerys glanced at Rulla. He tried to make a discreet gesture to her. Eventually she understood as her son, the king, continued to read reports passed to him by Varys. Perhaps the time has come to join the war in earnest, he heard her whisper to him. The king frustratingly glared down at the reports. Before looking up at Varys. What is the newest information on the armies and fleets on the Triarchy, after these battles and sieges, he asked. Again, all turned to Varys. The armies of the Triarchy should not number more than 150,000 men, your grace. And as for the remainder of their fleets, they should number at least 200 warships. Though one of my birds in the Iron Fleet reported that the Tioches used merchant ships and even fishing boats to aid in the defense of their city. So, it stands to reason that they could use merchant ships to add to their fleet. Merchant ships are never a problem against warships. Especially warships equipped with the best of weapons. Ballista and even catapults. But archers and peltastes aboard ships will always be a problem. Was there anything else, Lord Varys? Asked the king. There was not, my king. Now is the time. The king must decide. Or he will just make a reputation of this for the rest of his reign. He doesn't deserve that. I have known him since he was a boy. He is a good man. He just needs good direction. If he is willing to listen. The fleets of the Westerlands, the Reach, Dawn and the Crown Lands and our armies are all ready to join this war, your grace. Merely give the command, and we shall sail to the mainland of Lys and join the rest of your armies to crush the Lysan army once and for all before your fleets crush Daltala's fleet. That we might crush the Triarchy and Black Fire once and for all, said Tywin Lannister. All others voiced their agreement with the Lord of Casterly Rock. I will make my decision soon, my lords. That will be all. Lucerys frowned slightly as all left the small council. I must speak with him. If I do not, then he risks his reputation. Lucerys followed the king as he made his way to Maegor's Holdfast. Your grace. Apologies, if I might be so bold, might I have conversation? The king turned around and faced him. By all means, Lord Valerian, he replied. Lucerys walked to the king's side, whilst Sir Arthur and Sir Oswell stood behind the king. Might I speak my mind freely, your grace? Of course. Lucerys cleared his throat before he spoke. My king, the longer that the armies and fleets of half of the 7 kingdoms stay in the capital in idleness, it will foster resentment amongst the bannermen who answered your call. Especially as Eddard Stark, Robert Baratheon, Albert Arryn, Brynden Tully and Quarian Greyjoy are out there in mainland Lys, marching upon Lys' most important military stronghold, he said. And the more that they cover themselves with glory, the more that history will not show favor upon you once this is all over, just as history does not show favor to Viserys I. You have a chance of changing that and ending this war, once and for all. I beg you to not waste it. Rhaegar 18. Rhaegar inhaled deeply as Lucerys Valerian left his presence. He exhaled slowly as he stared down at the ground in front of him. Your grace. He turned around to Arthur. Is all well? Yes, I am just thinking, he replied. Roriger sighed through his nose whilst closing his eyes. He finally opened them when he turned his head towards Maegor's holdfast. Roriger frowned as he fully turned to Maegor's holdfast. "Let us go back," he said. They entered Maegor's holdfast and Roriger sat down in his solar. At his desk, he sat down and looked at the map of West Eos and the map of Essos. He updated both with the information provided by Varys. He knocked over the snail banner of Teosh at the island city with a ship figurine before the Stark, Tully, Arryn and Baratheon figurines knocked over several figurines and then he positioned them at Mimebtas. As he did so, he thought back to that small council session. He frowned as he remembered it. And seeing the impatient stares of the men gathered there, especially that of Tywin Lannister. And then he could hear the words of father, ringing in his head. Perhaps they may laugh without fear of reprisal as they did to Tytos Lannister. This will only continue, the more you are outstripped by a boy who has accomplished far more in 6 moons than you have in your entire lifetime as a prince and ever will as king. Now, he remembered Lucerys Valerian's words in his head. My king, the longer that the armies and fleets of half of the 7 kingdoms stay in the capital in idleness, it will foster resentment amongst the bannermen who answered your call. Especially as Eddard Stark, Robert Baratheon, Elbereth Arryn, Brynden Tully and Quayan Greyjoy are out there in mainland Lies, marching upon Lies' most important military stronghold. Roriger snarled at how they spoke to him. And how they looked at him in the small council. The true war, the war of the long night, is of more importance. And will be fought one day. And all they care about is glory and being remembered in taking part in this war. But as he looked down at the map again, he frowned again before slamming his hand against the table. All is going well. In the realm and in the war. And yet, why am I being constantly threatened by the successes of Eddard Stark? I am king. And yet, he somehow has more power than I do. He tricked me at Stokeworth and Elia gave him conditions far greater than the ones that Daeron II gave the Dornish to enter the 7 kingdoms. At least she didn't give them royal marriages. Not that she ever would. Aegon is to wed his sisters. The dragon must have 3 heads. And therefore, like Aegon the Conqueror, he must marry Rhaenys and Visenya. They may not like the thought as they grow up. But they will do as I command. For the realm's salvation, they will. And end the threat of the long night. But then he thought back to what Mother's dearest childhood friend had told him. Is this truly what the realm thinks of me? That I am indecisive. And that I cannot decide. I will prove them wrong. He glared at the map. He picked up the Stark direwolf figurine. And he ground it in his fist, wishing that he could crush it. But it only left a painful imprint in the palm of his hand. Do you truly think yourself my better, Stark? I will show you. I will take my armies and fleets and take Lies. Do you think that you will have the glory all to yourself? Arthur. Roriger called. Arthur opened the door and entered the solar. Roriger looked up at his friend. Yes. Have the small council reconvene. We will prepare to head out to war now. As Arthur left, Roriger heard running footsteps. He looked up with a puzzled look. Before any of his Kingsguard could say anything, the doors opened. Breathlessly, Jon stood in the doorway, panting as he faced Roriger. Roriger Ittai. Jon, take a breath. Calm down. Jon gulped and inhaled and exhaled before replying. Roriger, the Lannisters have left. What? What do you mean? Do they march back for the Westerlands? No. The Lannister army boarded their ships and are sailing for Essos as we speak. Why did he not wait? But when did they set out? Asked Roriger, frustrated. An hour ago. I only just found out. Notes. Roriger, as indecisive as ever, still cannot make a decision without someone frustratingly putting the ideas in his head. Whilst Tywin, impatient of Roriger's irresoluteness, sets sail, having already made all necessary preparations to set sail for the war. Chapter 132, Better Late Than Never. Summary. At the Great Lysan fortress of Mimebtas, based on Sforza Castle in Milan, the Allies are joined by reinforcements. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Eddard XXV. A beautiful summer's day. The climate here in Lies is beautiful. I can see why the Valyrian conquerors of the Freehold had become so enamored with these lands. There is a beauty to them. And in the great architecture they have built. Eddard admired the architecture of the great fortress of Mimebatass. It was a quadrangular fortress which seemed to be half of the size of the Kingspire Tower of Harrenhal, though it was built of black stone, resembling Harrenhal's black stones, yet looking like the black dragon stones, from what Ash had described to him from Elia's time there as Princess of Dragonstone. There was only one gate leading inside to the great fortress itself, and this gate were ogival-shaped and with tall towers and walls that would need high ladders to breach them. Like the fortress, the walls were made of black stone and were thrice as tall as the great Yonumber. The ogival gate was made of ironwood, Eddard could see, and the hinges and iron fittings looked recently made as he had been examined the gate and the defences. But as exquisite as the architecture of the Valyrians is, it is not home. Winterfell is home. Its warm hearths and the safety of its walls and the strength of its keeps are my home. And it is in the godswood and the heart trees that I find my comfort in times of trial. Eddard ceased looking around the walls beneath Mimebatass when the doors to the planning room opened. He turned around to see the bannermen of the north, the Riverlands, the Stormlands and the Vale enter, with Robert, Brynden and Elbereth leading them. The fortress was large. Large enough to house their entire army. Though there was no garrison to protect it when they had arrived, they had found almost no provisions, food, weapons and supplies inside Mimebatass upon their arrival. "Mark," asked Eddard. "Lord Stark. The enemy armies are closing in on us. Black fear too. Then this was no game when we came here. This was a trap. They wanted us to come here. They have gathered all their armies, Ned." "All to crush us," said Elbereth. "How many, Mark?" asked Robert. 150,000 men. "All of Lys, Qohor, Volantis, Norphos, Sellswords and Black Fires," he replied. "Fuck. No army of Westeros has ever faced an army of such an enormous size before. We would be evenly matched if Roriger had gotten his lazy ass off his ugly iron chair and sailed here with all his armies. He has all the ships and men to make the difference. And yet he does not even stir from the capital. Now that all the Triarchy and the Black Fires are gathered against us." "How many men have we that are ready for battle?" asked Eddard. 67,000 men, Brynden replied anxiously. "I cannot show fear. 150,000 men. We are nearly outnumbered 3-1. Doubt gnawed in his mind until he heard a familiar war horn. "I know that horn. From the Northern Rebellion. That is, the Lannisters." Eddard walked to the window. And sure enough, from his vantage point, he saw an army of tens of thousands marching towards Mimebatass. Salvation. Salvation has come in the form of Tywin Lannister. "That is no horn of the Free Cities?" asked Elbereth. "No. That is the Lannisters," said the Blackfish as they joined him, looking from the window. "Then the king is here." "The king reinforces our army?" asked Sir Raymond, heir to House D'Arry, still optimistic of Roriger supporting them. "No. It is only the Lannister army," Sir Raymond said. "Yon." Eddard ran down the stairs and to the entrance gates. As they reached the ogival gate, Eddard gestured to the men at the gateway. "Open the gates," one commanded at the gateway. Eddard smiled when he saw over 24 noblemen and knights ride through. And at their head was a man Eddard had only seen once, at Spring Falls from a distance, but he had never met him personally at the Red Keep when he swore fealty to Roriger. "Tywin Lannister. A long time ago, we were enemies. We meet again. Though this time as allies. And you come at an opportune time." Tywin Lannister climbed down from his saddle. Eddard approached him. "Lord Lannister. Your timing is impeccable," said Eddard as he offered his hand. The old lion of Casterly Rock shook his hand. "Indeed, Lord Stark. My scouts saw for themselves the scale of the armies of the Triarchy and the Blackfyre army," he said. "And how many men do you bring here with you, Lord Lannister?" asked Robert as he shook hands with him. "I bring 25,000 of the best of Casterly Rock and the Westerlands, Lord Baratheon," he replied. "Welcome additions to the war, Lord Lannister." "But is the king not here?" asked Brynden. At that question, the Lord Paramount of the Westerlands frowned. "The king is indecisive as always. He cannot decide without someone making it for him. I left King's Landing without his consent to join this war, whilst he was unable to even make a clear plan. I came because I saw this as the best chance to end this war for good before the war can come to Westeros shores. Damn you, Rhaegar, you stupid bastard. At least there are men amongst the Lords Paramountcy who saw my plan as the best one to end this war. Come, Lord Lannister. You and your bannermen shall join us in the planning room inside the fortress. And there is more than enough room for all your men to join us inside Mimebata's walls. He nodded before turning to one of his knights. Sir Vilar, inform the army commanders to join us inside the walls now, he said. My lord, he replied with a bow of his head before he rode back out of the gates. As the Westerlords dismounted from their horses, with squires taking the horses to the stable, Eddard overheard Elbereth speak to a young Westerlord, called Quentin Bainfort. What happened to the Westerlands fleet? He asked. Commanded by Lord Sebastian Farman, they sailed to join the Allied fleet, fresh from Volantis. The last that we heard, they are sailing to join the Iron Fleet and battle with the Triarchy's fleets at Lyse. The Westerlords followed them inside the fortress and into the planning room. Squires passed around local goblets of wine and water. The goblets were too fancy for Eddard's liking. They were made of glass and were beautifully decorated and engraved with various Valyrian glyphs and imagery. We number a little less than 100,000 men. Though that makes all the difference come the battle, we are still outnumbered by another 50,000 of theirs, said Eddard as he gestured to the battlegrounds where they would soon battle. What have your scouts reported, Lord Stark? Asked Tijet Lanek. That they divided into two formations. With their reinforcements from Norphos and Qohor bringing up from the north, as well as loyalists to the Triarchy from Myr and Tiosh. They are joined by the army of Lyse. And all of them are commanded by Vargid Mariner, Goodson to Valerys Daltala and his best warrior and commander. And the other marches from the south. With the Volantens, Sellswords and Black Fires. This fortress is key to winning this battle. So long as we control it, then we will win the battle. But we cannot keep all our armies here. They would trap us and burn us with siege weapons and flaming arrows and ballista, Tywin Lannister pointed out. True. And that is why we shall leave a small garrison here. A garrison of 1,000 of our best, led by Sir Brynden, said Eddard. The Blackfish nodded at his command before Eddard gestured back at the map. I shall command half of our army to face the main army from the north and break the strength of the Triarchy with the armies of the north, the Stormlands and the Vale. Lord Lannister, you shall take command of the armies of the Westerlands and the Riverlands and fight off the Sellsword and Volanten host to the south. If Black Fires are there, then there is a chance that the man himself could be there. Tywin Lannister and his bannermen nodded at hearing that, as though glad of the chance of glory and taking part in a great battle was worth the long voyage. They will try and unite their armies and converge on the fortress. But if we hold them back and if any splinter force that they send to take the fortress in a surprise attack are held back by the Blackfish and his force of knights, then we will break the enemy army. And if both Mariner and Blackfyr are slain, we will break the enemy's resolve, Elbereth pointed out. Precisely. And we will win this war, on land. As for the fleets, I am confident that with the arrival of the Westerlands fleet, all our combined strength will break and defeat the Triarchy's fleet. And we will at last win this war for good. Notes. Why does Tywin join them and not try and end this war like he did in Robert's Rebellion in canon? Because the bulk of the Triarchy's fleet is in Lyse and he has only a mere fifth of their number in terms of ships. And he hopes to use this as a chance to gain the favor of the Starks and benefit from what improvements they have built the north. Chapter 133, Girt and Going Forth. Summary. A great battle involving less than 250,000 men begins. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Vargid XX. Vargid rolled his eyes when he spotted the arrival of Maegor and the commanders of his forces. Ardyne, now Captain General of the Golden Company and Sellsword captains of the Second Sons, the Windblown and the Company of the Cat had all joined Maegor and bore the banner of the Black Fires as well as the banners of their companies. Vargid snorted when Maegor dismounted his horse. The armor he wore was ridiculously decorated with onyx gems in the center of his blood-red breastplate. All the onyx gems formed a three-headed Blackfyr dragon on the breastplate. And sheathed at his side was the Blackfyr sword, once sword of Aegon the Conqueror and Daeron the Young Dragon. but was now wielded by this pretentious and volatile boy who thought himself a dragon like those ancestors. I will be glad when he finally does take the Iron Throne. I will no longer have to endure the shit that spews from his mouth. My only consolation is that he still does not realize that he is Valerie's puppet. He will always be his puppet, whether he is king or not. Vargid. We have come, said Maegor pretentiously. Truly. I thought that I was hallucinating from the sunshine. But no, I must endure your tiresome behavior once again. Then enter, your grace, and let us plan our battle with the enemy, said Vargid. As Maegor and his men entered his tent, Vargid rolled his eyes. Stupid boy. I am glad that his beloved wife is heavy with child. If he does die, then Valeries can make him king and his ward. And hopefully not let him turn into a vicious little cunt. Vargid stood at the head of the table with his own commanders, all of whom were men that he trusted to hold their own, to take up arms and to kill without question and die without complaint. Even a few of the noble and pure-blood Valyrian commanders and captains in his army had some competence and talented at combat and leadership. But Maegor was a sword, not a general. If he had directed Maegor to annihilate a group of riders, he would do so with pleasure and no complaints. But he is no general. He could never lead a battle. He could only ever fight it. The enemy are at Mimebatass then, he asked impatiently. Vargid frowned as he pointed at the fortress. I fucking hate it when someone interrupts when another is talking. Eddard Stark and his army are inside Mimebatass. They have less than 70,000 men, he announced. He waited for them to finish laughing at the numbers of the West AOC warlords who had so damaged the Triarchy and their allies. The arrogant bastards. They have crushed 5 of our armies, all whilst outnumbered. And they have the gall to laugh so dismissively of their numbers. Until they were joined by Tywin Lannister and an army of the Westerlands, bringing their numbers to 92,000. Though we outnumber them, we cannot underestimate them. For they have defeated 5 of our armies and brought the war to this conclusion, Vargid announced angrily. Though we will win, they will not go down without a fight. And they will inflict heavy casualties upon us. But once they are defeated, we can set sail for the Crown Lands. Surely King Rhaegar will leave King's Landing. He cannot be so far behind the Lannisters and would want to share in the glory won by Stark, Tully, Arryn, Baratheon and Greyjoy. And once he does invade, our fleet can ambush his and sink them all to the bottom of the sea. And then sail our army to the Crown Lands. And finally, end this war and with our victory. So, what are the enemy doing? Maegor demanded impatiently. Vargid raised a brow at the impatience of the young Blackfyr. How can he expect to be king when this is all over? Does he expect to kill all whom annoy him or have killed his family in the past? And to rape whores and noble ladies daily to set an example? Unless Valeries doesn't expect him to last long in King's Landing. Does he plan to have Maegor's future children warded with him in lies? With the enemy in Mimebatass, they have the advantage. That fortress can house over 100,000 men. But, if we were to march now, all 2 armies, we would fight their own armies to defend themselves, whilst keeping a garrison to defend the fortress. Whilst our 2 armies fight them, another force shall capture the fortress. Once they are inside and all the defenders are dead, we will use it to send our cavalry to attack the enemy flanks of both armies. And finally, we shall emerge victorious and finally win this war. How many will be sent to take Mimebatass, Gonfalonia? Asked Vaelorys Dargeron, one of the few competent Lysan commanders chosen from the Lysan nobility. 10,000 men. They will be commanded by you, Lord Dargeron, he stated. He was surprised by this choice. Gonfalonia, you honor me. Shut up, boy. Before you make me regret my generosity. The rest of the army will divide into forces of 70,000. I will lead the northern army and attack on first light, he continued before he turned to Maegor. As for you, your grace, you shall lead the southern army and attack once the first attack is underway. Glad of the command given, he nodded with a smirk. Once the battle begins, they will try and hold us back to stop us from linking the armies up. But once the fortress falls, nothing they do will matter, Vargid explained. Tijet 17. Gods, there are so many. Tijet looked ahead at the enemy army. He gulped as he saw the many banners spread across the entire army. He reached down for his sword. Tijet often felt comfort when he held the hilt of his sword. Never was there a day in which he so desired the comfort of feeling the hilt of his sword. The Triarchy have lost many battles since this war began. To the Greyjoys at sea. And to the Starks, Tullys, Arryns and Baratheons on land. But can we emerge victorious with this battle? And with House Lannister fighting also? Tijet rode in front of the army of House Lannister. There was little more than 1,000 men at arms and a few dozen knights. All marched under the banners of House Lannister. Tijet couldn't deny the sense of pride he felt in seeing the banners of his house and his men marching under it, and with said banner on the tabards of his knights and on their shields. Tijet's dedication to establish prestige and reputation for his house came after the letter sent to him soon after their arrival on mainland Lysan lands. The letter had come from Tarbeck Hall. It was from Darlessa, telling him that she had given birth to a healthy son, who she had named Tyarch. I will make my little Tyarch proud of his father and his house with what I do here today, he thought with eager determination. He looked around their lines. He saw the army of the Westerlands gathered alongside their rivermen allies. The command of the Riverlands army fell under Lord Jason Mallister, but he in turn followed Tywin's command. What glory this battle shall bring us! Tijet rode to Tywin's side when Cleos came riding to invite all bannermen of House Lannister and House Tully to his side. Tijet felt it strange that Jaime was not there. He had chosen to join the Blackfish at the fortress, alongside the best knights and warriors of the army they had brought against the might of houses Stark, Tully, Lannister, Arryn and Baratheon. Jaime had gone with his best friend, Adam Marbrand, as well as the quiet and heavily scarred knight of Clegane's Keep, Sassander Clegane. Thankfully more civilized than his late brother, who it was said he did not mourn in the slightest. Jaime also took with him Brightraw, hoping to slaughter many with its magnificent blade. Jaime has always wanted to fight a battle. No better chance than this battle. And he will have plenty to fight when they try and take the fortress. What news, Lord Lannister? Asked Leo Lefford. Lord Marbrand returns from his scouting venture, he announced as the last of the Riverlords arrived, the brother of Aemon, Stephen Frey. I have seen too many weasels in my life. I hope that Tywin has the Freys bear the brunt of the battle. It would do good for the Tullys to see even fewer weasels in the twins. Daemon Marbrand returned. He bowed his head to Tywin before he gave his report. My lord, Stark faces the half of the enemy's army to the north and 10,000 have splintered from there and marched to Mimebatass, he said. Stark's trick worked. The army's minority march on the fortress. Though they have only 1,000 at Mimebatass, you only need 100 to hold off against that many men. And with Brynden the Blackfish in command and with Jaime there, as well as hundreds of hardened veteran knights, they have no chance in taking the fortress. And how many of them are here, Lord Marbrand? Asked Tywin. Tijet turned to his brother after glancing at the enemy banners. He saw the tiger and elephant banners of Volantis, the banners of various sellsword companies, including the plain gold banner of the Golden Company and the banner of House Blackfyr. We face 70,000 men, my lord. Volantens, sellswords and Blackfyres. And who commands them, Lord Marbrand? Asked Jason Mallister. Maegor Blackfyr himself, he said before pointing in the distance. Tijet smirked when he saw him. Riding across the front lines of the enemy army, was a man dressed in red armor and with a black dragon engraved in the center of his breastplate, whilst he wielded a Valyrian steel sword, shining beautifully in the sunlight beaming down on their battlefield. 7 hells. The warrior brings Blackfyr himself to face us. Tijet turned to Tywin. He saw how his jaw moved slightly. Almost like a lion tensing its jaw, ready to feast on a deer it killed at a watering hole. Blackfyr shall die by a Lannister sword. And finally end the arrogant line that do think that they can steal the Iron Throne. Tijet, you will take the majority of the knights of the Westerlands to the western flank. Lord Mallister, you will take the majority of the knights of the Riverlands to the eastern flank. Keep these forces hidden until you hear my command. For now, our infantry and archers will hold this position until Blackfyr orders an attack, he said. How are you so certain that Blackfyr would make such a move, Lord Lannister? It is foolhardy and reckless, stated Lord Norbert Vance of Atranta. Precisely, Lord Vance. My spies in lies tell me these things of the man who Daltala hopes to place on the Iron Throne. He is brash, impulsive and easily roused. Very similar to his namesake and to his father, in that respect, he explained. A fine plan. Always know plenty of the enemy commander. It is always good to get an understanding of the man himself. And how you can lure such a man into a trap. Our infantry shall form defensive positions with our archers behind. With the spearmen forming a wall of shields and spears, Black Fear shall charge. And once he does, his army will be either shot down by the archers or impaled on the spears. The lack of many cavalry at the flanks will lure him into a false sense of superiority, which in turn will make him take the chance and charge at the front lines. Tijet rode to the flank and took away 3/4 of the knights of the Westerlands away from their positions, 3,000 knights in total. He rode alongside cousin Stafford's son Davin, Lewis Leiden, Garrison Prester, Roland Crickehall and Elis Westerling. A glorious charge. A fine chapter to write into the history of newly born House Lanek. As they rode to the rear of the plains, near a stream flowing water into the river Belaris, which fed its waters into the summer sea to the south. Rest here, men. Let your horses quench their thirst. We move when we get the signal from Lord Lannister, Tijet commanded. But then he heard a horn blare. It was an Isozi one, Tijet knew. He knew from his time in the Stepstones against Maegor Blackfear's father. Davin. Go and see what Blackfear is doing, he said. Yes, uncle, he said, turning his horse around. Tijet stroked his horse's mane as it thirstily drank water. The knights and lords around Tijet anxiously and impatiently looked ahead at the battlefield, wondering what was happening. Tijet inhaled and exhaled gently to keep calm and patient. Before he heard Davin riding towards them. Uncle Tijet. The Blackfear army is charging upon our army. What, all of them? Asked the Lord of Crickehall. Yes, my lord, he replied. Gods, Tywine, you were right. That boy is nothing if not impulsive and stupid. Get ready, men. It won't be long before we make our move also. Notes. The greatest battle any of them will ever fight has begun. Chapter 134, Bursting the Battle Line. Summary. Mimebatass is now the perfect point from which cavalry can be sent to flank troops from either side, which is why they want to take it back. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Brynden 14. 10,000 men, Brynden whispered as he grabbed a javelin from a nearby weapons rack. The army marched towards the outskirts of the walls, just out of range of their archers. Only for a group of riders to ride towards the gates, one holding a white flag. Will we meet them, Sir Brynden? Or tell them to fuck off, asked Hotar Umber. We'll tell them to fuck off. Sieges are dull otherwise. The quicker we start here, the quicker this battle ends, Brynden replied. Several nearby knights chuckled as a rider halted beneath the gates. Brynden looked down at him. He was a young man of Valyrian heritage and had short silver hair, much shorter than that of King Rhaegar's. I am Vaelor Istargaron, I command this army. I would give you all this one chance to speak of surrender. Accept, and you will be spared and given the chance to serve in the army of your rightful king, Maegor Blackfear. Refuse, and you will almost assuredly die. Brynden rolled his eyes. We don't accept your surrender. He stared up at him in surprise. What? We would like to accept your surrender, but unfortunately, combined with our own troops, this fortress isn't large enough to accommodate you and your troops, Brynden shouted back. As Brynden turned around, the men around him all laughed at his audacious reply. A jape worthy of a Lannister, Sir Brynden, said Catelyn's husband Jaime. Come now, young lion. Who said I was japing? I wasn't. They laughed even more whilst the negotiating party rode back to their lines. Get ready at the gates and at the walls. The fate of this battle hinges on us holding this fortress. If it falls, the battle is lost. So, hold your ground. Trust in the man next to you and trust in the steel in your hands. Let them come, not with 10,000 men, but 100,000. But no matter how many, you will hold your ground. And let all the 7 kingdoms hear of how 1,000 knights bled the grounds red at Mimebatass, whilst many back home shall think of you all with envy when they hear the tales of this great battle and the brave men who fought and those who held their ground at this very fortress. All knights assembled in the fortress cheered, roared and bashed their swords, maces and axes against their shields as Brindon walked down the steps until he got to the gate. He looked at the obstacles in the way of the gate. That should hold. For a while, at least, he thought as he looked at the barriers of sharpened stakes, barrows, carts and even caltrops on the ground. Uncle! They are coming now. Brindon looked up at Edmure, who was holding his shield and sword up already. Brindon ran up the steps again, followed by Jaime Lannister and Sandor Clegane. And as he stood by Edmure's side, he saw 1,000 men march towards them. All marching under the banner of the Black Goat of Qohor. Qohorix. I hate Qohorix, Brindon muttered. His feelings towards Qohorix came from the tales of the city of sorcerers and how they sacrificed children for the Dark God. As well as practicing dark magics such as blood magic and necromancy. He certainly didn't like the taunts the Qohorix shouted at them. Ready. Get ready down at the gate. Brindon shouted. He turned to the Lannister boy. Sir Jaime, get down there and take command. Yes, Sir Brindon, he replied before unsheathing his family's formerly long-lost greatsword, Brightraw. Brindon held up his javelin whilst all others amongst them got ready to throw or shoot arrows from behind the melons, wide enough for them to safely hide behind. Brindon allowed himself a quick glance around. Now, Sir Brindon, asked Demon Estermont. No. Not until they are so close that we do not miss, he replied. Brindon heard barbaric shouting in their ugly tongue. And he glanced down. He saw them charge at the gates with a ram. Brindon tightened the grip on his javelin. Now, he shouted. Brindon stepped out of hiding and threw down his javelin on the nearest man holding the ram. The javelin pierced through his neck and far inside his upper body. He fell screaming whilst dozens of others fell, with arrows and javelins pierced into them. The few remaining fell back. And then Brindon looked up to see hundreds more charge, with ladders and with another ram. They are coming again. Take cover, he ordered. Brindon took another 2 javelins before he saw that there were none left. They will just keep coming until we are all dead. Brindon saw the first few men coming towards them with a ladder. He threw a javelin at the first man. The javelin caught him in the chest. He collapsed onto his chest, taking the front of the ladder with him. The men behind him stumbled because of this, giving archers and peltastes on the walls to fire and throw at them. Dozens of Qohorix fell dead or wounded as they continued to charge at the walls, with ladders and a ram. Brindon finally unsheathed faith and held his shield up, ready to fight. He turned to Edmure, who was gulping as he looked at the many charging towards the wall and the gate. Brindon saw the fear in his eyes. Easy, Edmure. Don't let these bastards see fear on you, said Brindon before he patted him on the shoulder. Brindon kept a firm hold of faith and his shield as he saw the Qohorix charge. He frowned when he saw the banner of the Black Goat of Qohor. Knights, form a shield wall, he shouted when he saw archers shooting at them. Brindon held his shield up as he took cover behind a melon. Edmure held his own shield up in time. For 2 arrows struck at his shield. And Brindon saw as at least 200 Qohorix began taking place behind the 4 ladders. Brindon heard a crashing of wood against stone. He turned to see the front of a ladder rest on the wall only between Sandor Clegane and Denard Silvrix, who fell. And he heard the taunts and shouts of Qohorix in the common tongue of Westeros and the Qohorix style of the Valyrian tongue. Clegane and Fell both held up their large weapons, a great sword and a large axe respectively. And the first 2 men climbed down and set their feet on the walls. Before Clegane bisected one and Fell beheaded the other. Fell drew a dagger and threw it at a 3rd man on the ladder. Brindon turned to the nearest ladder. It was between Edmure and Leopold Tallheart. Brindon readied himself as 3 men landed on the parapet. Edmure sliced the hip of the nearest man and bashed him across with his shield, knocking him onto the grounds below, where he was quickly beheaded by a Croquehall knight. Brindon eviscerated the 2nd man whilst Tallheart stabbed the 3rd man through his heart. More men started climbing onto the walls. Brindon gasped when he heard the portcullis being raised. Fuck. He turned to see the gatehouse was swarming with soldiers. Clegane. Take back the gatehouse, he roared. The knight of Clegane's keep charged towards the gatehouse, cutting down over a dozen men in quick succession as they battered at the gates with the ram. Brindon stabbed one in the neck with a dagger before throwing his dagger onto another climbing up the ladder. But every time that he showed his face, arrows came flying. Brindon bashed another across with his shield, landing on the grounds below before Brindon stabbed another. How many more of these will come? But as he wondered this, he looked down when he heard cheering from the Cohorix. "Hold the line," shouted Lannister as he held up Bright Raw. Dozens of Cohorix struggled through the obstacles, even screaming and falling from the caltrops. But those who broke through, were quickly cut down by Lannister and the knights he commanded. Brindon looked ahead to see the rest of the army was advancing towards them. "There's too fucking many. Robert the 18th. Ned was right. Vargid Mariner may be a warrior and a general, but he is not a skilled commander. Ned is perhaps the best commander I have ever met. To have won as many battles as he has won. And never lost one." Robert looked at the Triarchy army, who outnumbered them by 24,000 men. Odds which Robert loved. This was his 8th battle. And as always, he loved nothing more than the clashing of steel on flesh. He held up his hammer with great anticipation as the Northerners under Ned's command all charged towards the center of the Triarchy's army. Robert remembered Ned's plan well. And it was genius. Especially this, to do the last thing that Vargid would have expected. Robert patted Stormmain on the neck. "One more battle, old friend. And then we can return home. And hopefully never fight in battle again," Robert thought as he kept a firm grip of his hammer. Robert grinned when he saw the flanks of the Triarchy army begin to fold onto the Northern army. "Form up! Form up!" Robert roared for the army to hear. The infantry and cavalry of the Stormlands all formed lines, ready to charge upon the unprotected flanks of the Triarchy's army. Once more upon the scum, men of the Stormlands. At Myr and at Nalavar, I saw the bravery and the fighting spirit of the Stormlands in you all. Show me once more. But most of all, show these frilly Asozi cunts. Robert nodded with pride as hardened Stormlanders cheered and roared, bashing steel on shields for all the Triarchy's armies to hear. And then, Robert heard the ever-familiar sound of Ned's horn. Robert chuckled at hearing that. The fear of the foes of the North. But a sound of delight for those allies of the North and men of the North. "With me, lads. Ours is the fury." Together with Robert, they cheered the words of House Baratheon as well as the words of their own houses. And now they fell upon the Triarchy's army, surrounding the Northern army arrogantly, as if to show off the grandness of their military prowess. And Robert smirked when he saw the same across the field, where Elbereth was leading the charge of the Knights of the Vale and the Vale infantry towards the unprotected Triarchy armies and their allies. Robert roared as he glared down at the enemy soldiers, all of whom were just beginning to turn around to face the oncoming and cataclysmic horror, one in which they could not escape. Robert was the first to charge into the Triarchy's men. Rather than wield his hammer in close quarters such as this, he sliced down onto the many men beneath him with antler. Robert kicked a soldier trying to stab his horse. The kick knocked the man out and he fell on his back. Robert stabbed a man as he tried to chop at his leg with an axe. His thrust pierced through his skull and Robert sliced across at the two men next to him, beheading them both before Robert sliced the throat of a third man. But then Robert saw spearmen point their spears at him. Quickly, Robert sheathed antler and jumped down from Stormmain and fought with his hammer. He swung his hammer across at two men charging at him. The swing bludgeoned the two in the face. And then Robert turned to face the spearmen who had forced him to dismount from Stormmain. Robert roared as he charged at them. One thrusted his spear at him. The thrust cut at Robert's chainmail. Robert smashed his armored fist into the man's face. And he swung his hammer across at his chest. He looked at where he had cut him. He saw blood, but nothing serious. Then he faced another 5 spearmen. Robert thrusted his hammer into another spearman's balls before smashing it onto his neck. Robert swiveled on his feet, swinging his hammer across twice before he brought it down onto another's shield. The swing disarmed him of his shield. He grunted in pain as it fell from his grasp. And Robert roared as he swung it across his face. Now Robert swung his hammer across at 2 of them. Facing the last one, He thrusted his spear at Robert blindly whilst keeping his shield up, as if that would protect him. Robert grabbed the spear shaft near the spearhead and snapped it off before he kicked the spearman's shield. He stumbled back before Robert swung his hammer down onto his face before throwing the spearhead at a man with his back turned to Robert. Notes: Mimebatas acts as a perfect strategic point for both sides, if either controls it. Rather like with Hougoumont Farm at the Battle of Waterloo, and it prevents both Triarchy and Blackfear armies from uniting. Chapter 135, The Great Fortress of Lies. Summary: Robert and his army and Elbert and the Vale army break onto the flanks of Vargid's army. And Brynden continues to hold the fortress whilst fighting off the last of the 10,000 army. Notes: see the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text: Eddard XXVI. Now they are breaking. Eddard panted as he swung ice across at two more men. Both were cut down easily as Ned looked around. They had done it. By charging at the enemy's center, they had tricked Mariner into folding the flanks onto them and letting their guard down. Before Robert and Elbert charged onto their unprotected flanks with cavalry and infantry, Eddard could hear Robert shouting and taunting the enemy with every swing of his hammer. But Eddard was tired. He had been ceaselessly charging and killing men in the dozens, if not hundreds. And his armor and sword were clear evidence of that. For his armor and ice were covered with blood, caked on both by the power of the sunshine in this Lysian climate. Eddard wondered how much more the battle would last. For every 10 men he cut down, one of his own men was either wounded or killed. Which only seemed to drive Eddard on further, killing more and more until he could reach the enemy's center. And everywhere he went, he was followed by many northern warriors and knights. He stabbed a young nobleman cutting across at him with an arrow. He turned to another who charged at him with a spear from horseback. Eddard grabbed the spear before it could thrust at his helm. And he dragged the spear, pulling the rider with him. He groaned as he landed on the ground, back first, before Eddard stabbed him in the face. And then Eddard saw the approach of a fearsome enemy. Wielding spears and round shields, they marched in a highly disciplined formation, never breaking to turn and run or even march out of pace. The Unsullied, Eddard thought as he raised ice up high, ready to fight the many. Eddard turned around to see Jorah Mormont beheading a Norvoshi officer with long claw. And the Great Yon beheading 3 men with a swing of Prince Hesbon. Ricard Karstark kicked a young Valyrian nobleman to the ground and sliced his throat with twilight before impaling another with it. And Willam was swinging Bastion around whilst laughing at every man it chopped down. Eddard roared for all to hear as he sliced ice across at the oncoming Unsullied. He sliced 2 down quickly before he turned to one who swiftly thrusted his spear at his wolf's head helm. The thrust cut at his helm, Eddard could feel. But he beheaded him easily before another quickly thrusted his spear at Eddard. Eddard, using his powers as a werewolf, halted the thrust by grabbing the spearhead. With a quick twist of his wrist, the spearhead was broken off from the spear shaft. And then Eddard eviscerated him with ice. Eddard panted as he turned to his right to see what could only be a great warrior face him. Just from looking at him, Eddard knew that this man was a highly skilled warrior. He threw down his helm with one hand whilst holding up a blooded arrow with his spare hand. Across his armor, from his gorget to his greaves, were battle scars and dents, as well as his face. His face, though handsome, was wrinkled from scars and from increasing age. His black eyes glared with surprise at Eddard for slaying Unsullied. And when he looked again at his arrow, he recognized that it was Valyrian steel. Eddard shivered when he saw the way that only Valyrian steel shone in the sun. Vargid Mariner. He pointed his arrow at Eddard, just as he pointed ice at him. Eddard Stark, he growled. Eddard said simply. He closed the distance between the two, ready to fight the enemy commander. Mariner swung his arrow at Eddard. Eddard swiftly blocked the swing with ice. And before he could parry ice aside, Eddard thrust the broken spearhead at his chest. Eddard glared at him as he groaned and spat out blood, falling to his knees. Come on, lads. Break these bastards. Push them back, and see victory is ours. Eddard roared for all the Northerners, Stormlanders and Valyman to hear. At which they all cheered with vigor and pride. Eddard eviscerated another soldier as 2 men dragged Vargid Mariner back, heavily wounded that he was. Finally, as Eddard cut down 2 more men and beheaded another 2, he saw the men in the rear falter. "We've done it." And they began to fall back. Eddard stabbed ice into the ground as they began to retreat. Panicked shouts in different tongues could be heard from the rear as they all fell back. Eddard roared as he lifted ice up high for all to see and hear. The Northerners all cheered at Eddard as he faced them all. And as Eddard turned to his left, he saw Elberut and the Valiman cheer as the foe fled the blooded field. When he turned to his right, he saw Robert roaring and cheering the loudest amongst the Stormlanders as he lifted high his hammer and began to bash it against his shield. Brynden 15. Brynden stabbed another through his neck with faith before he swung his shield across at the unprotected face of another. He stabbed another in the stomach before eviscerating a nobleman wielding a large arrow. Brynden panted as he held himself up by pressing his hand on a barrel. He sliced the kneecaps of another charging at him, thinking him near death's door. Brynden proved otherwise by stabbing him as he fell to his knees. Gods, how much longer must we hold on? Again, he beheaded a soldier as he thrusted a spear at him. Brynden quickly grabbed the spear and threw it at an archer standing at the gateway, shooting arrows at them. The spear caught the archer in his stomach. He fell from the gateway and landed on the men charging below. The spear shaft snapped as it impaled another. The walls had fallen 3 hours before. And now they were still holding a shield wall before the fortress doors. But they were still swarming the courtyard towards them in great numbers. Despite the thousands of their men lying dead or screaming for help to treat their wounds. Brynden reached for his water skin again. But he stared hopelessly at it when he realized that it was empty. Brynden bashed one down with his shield and stabbed him as he lay there before another charged at him with an axe. A dagger was thrown at him from one of the knights beside him. He could hear it all around him. He could see it. He could smell it. And he could feel it. The knights all around him were all exhausted. They were blooded. Many had broken their swords from overuse and were now relying on weapons they had claimed from the men they had slain. And many were wounded, some more than once. Brynden was wounded twice. One was an arrow cut across the chainmail protecting his shoulder. And the other was a sword cut across his arm bracer when it was battered off in the clash. But Brynden was more concerned when he saw Edmure. Edmure was exhausted. He was wounded in 4 places. He had lost his helm. And his bracers were battered off. And then Brynden saw the enemy's commander. The arrogant Dargeron boy, who was pointing a sword at the center of the shield wall. "Push forwards. Break these foreign bastards that would invade Lies and the Triarchy," he roared for them to hear. Only for Sir Jaime to charge at him as he charged at the shield wall with his men. The young lion bisected him with his blooded, but beautiful greatsword, before retreating to the shield wall. The enemy men shouted and cursed at them for the death of their commander. "You Lannisters are very skilled at making men angry with your perfection, aren't you?" Brynden jested. And for the first time, there was laughter in the shield wall. Brynden laughed before he cleared his throat and gulped to wet his mouth. "Well, lads, have we not bled the enemy enough? Yet all is not done. Keep these bastards back. And let us return home to well-deserved wine, women and feasts." Brynden roared as he broke from the shield wall. The roars he heard from the shield wall inspired him on further as he cut down another soldier and bashed his shield across at another's face, knocking him out. He saw Edmure parry a sword thrust aside before stabbing a Valyrian nobleman in his guts. Father and Hoster would be so proud of him if they could see him fight and keep on going, whilst thousands of other soldiers or knights would have surrendered by now. Brynden slit the throat of another soldier before he looked at the gates. They were almost empty. But the courtyard was still full of enemies. Sir Brynden. Brynden looked up at the walls to see Eamon Estermont and Jory Castle cutting down several soldiers. "Sir Brynden. They've got more coming towards us." "Another 1,000, shouted Jory Castle as he threw another soldier over the walls and to his death on the other side. They lifted the portcullis before their ram could get close when they took the walls. "Now we must lower it. If we do not, then we will surely die. We cannot keep this up any longer. Take back the courtyard. Take back the walls. Take back this fortress. The day is almost ours, lads." Brynden yelled before he beheaded another man with a swing of faith across his neck. Brynden turned to the gates, battered open by the ram and with over 100 men filling the ground between the gates and the courtyard. The dead men provided cover from the caltrops, Brynden realized when he looked there. Shut the gates. Pull down the portcullis. Brynden roared. He turned to Ed Muir, who had just cut down another sellsword before he finished him off with a stab to his neck. Brynden blocked a spear's thrust with his shield and replied with a swing at the man's neck. Blood spat from his throat onto Brynden's cuirass. Ed Muir. With me. To the gate. Brynden yelled. Together they ran to the gate as dozens came charging through the gateway. Ed Muir, to the windlass. Pull it and lower the portcullis. Brynden said as he patted him on the shoulder. As he ran to the gatehouse, knights on the walls began pulling the ladders up and over into the courtyard to prevent their further use. Brynden charged to the gateway with Jory Castle, Donal Wainwood, Adam Marbrand, Jaime Lannister, Sandor Clegane, Eamon Estermont and Gillian Swan. Together, they ran to the gates, where more were breaking through. Brynden disarmed one with a swing of his shield and slit his throat before he could try and defend himself. Jaime Lannister cut down 2 men with a single swing of Brightraw whilst Brynden swung both sword and shield at the mass of men. As 4 men fell from his sword, Eamon Estermont stabbed a sellsword in the guts before he roared as he threw his sword at another. Whilst Sandor Clegane cut down 3 men before savagely snapping another man's neck with one hand, Brynden beheaded a man with faith before they cleared the gateway. And as a few hundred more came charging at the gateway, the portcullis collapsed down, completely sealing the gateway. Brynden inhaled and exhaled loudly as he saw them jeer and curse at them. He did it. Well done, Ed Muir, my boy. Notes. Ned killed Vargid and defeated his army. And Brynden held the fortress long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Chapter 136, The Restless Lion and the Dark Dragon. Summary. Tijet has broken onto the Black Fir flank and soon sees the man himself. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Tijet 18. Tijet smirked when he saw the banners of House Tully as the Riverlands knights flanked hard into the infantry he was fighting. As the battle was still being fought, Tijet stabbed another Golden Company sellsword before he could swing a great sword at Tijet's head. And he threw a nearby spear at another man. The spear impaled him through the guts. Tijet swung his sword at another man's neck. He beheaded him before he stabbed a man in the eye with a dagger and threw the dagger at yet another sellsword of the Golden Company. Tijet threw aside his water skin when he realized that it was empty. This is worthy of song. Tijet stabbed another man in the neck before taking hold of his sword and throwing it at the back of a sellsword trying to stab a wounded knight of his house. And then he caught sight of him. Black Fir. Tijet pulled his sword out of the neck of the man he had slain before making his way towards the vicious claimant as he was mercilessly cutting down many soldiers and knights. I must. I have a chance to kill him and end the Black Fires for good. Tijet cut across another Volantene tiger cloak before he came towards Black Fir. Black Fir cruelly snapped the neck of a young knight of House Prester he had grabbed by the neck. Before he stabbed a knight of House Brax and then beheaded a knight of House Free. He bisected another Free knight before Tijet made himself heard. How is your skill today, Black Fir? Does it lack? Not surprising from the poor knights you have slain, he taunted. Just as Tywine said. Black Fir snarled as he turned to face Tijet. His face was marred with murderous rage as he lifted the Black Fir sword up whilst Tijet pointed his own sword at him. Come and see my skill for yourself, Lannister, he snapped before he swung across at Tijet's sword. Tijet pulled his sword back as Black Fir sliced down on Tijet. Tijet dodged the blow and thrusted at Black Fir's head. Black Fir moved aside and tried to stab Tijet with a dagger. Tijet parried the dagger aside, disarming him of the weapon. Tijet grinned as he pointed his sword at Black Fir's throat. Black Fir snarled and yelled in fury as he swung his blooded sword at Tijet's neck. Quickly, Tijet held up his sword and blocked the blow before their swords clashed midair. He is highly skilled and very strong. And he is endurable. But he is an angry young man. So much anger from the looks of him. Not even Tywine is that angry when confronted with the lechery of Tyrion, the stupidity of Cersei and the stubbornness of Jaime. They swung their swords at each other, parrying each other's thrust and clashing swords midair. Until Tijet remembered the time when he fought Eddard Stark. "That's how I beat him." Tijet blocked until Black Fear tried to slice horizontally at his chest. And Tijet held his sword up, inwardly hoping that his Valyrian steel sword would not shatter his sword. For if it did, then his plan would not work. His sword blocked the blow. Black Fear angrily grabbed his sword with both hands and lifted his sword up high to swing at Tijet's neck. Only for Tijet to slice at Black Fear's chest from beneath the folds of his cuirass, which only had chainmail for protection. Tijet grinned when he saw the red blood flow. "Thank you for the lesson, Stark." And Black Fear groaned before he screamed in fury as he swung across at Tijet. But Tijet blocked the blow by grabbing hold of the crossguard of Black Fear with one hand and stabbed Black Fear's blooded chainmail and chest underneath the folds of his armor. Black Fear gasped and groaned. His sword fell from his hands. He glared at Tijet as he fell to his knees before he gasped a last breath and fell on his side. Tijet panted when he looked around. The enemy army were falling back. "They're retreating. They run. The cowards run." Tijet inhaled and exhaled heavily as he watched them retreat. "By the warrior, we have done it." Tijet looked down at Black Fear. His eyes were glaring up at the sky, as though cursing the gods for his death. Tijet reached for his eyelids and forced them shut. Then he looked to his side. He grasped the blooded bastard sword of Valyrian steel. Black Fear, House Lannister's own sword, Brightraw, has returned home. Jaime has no doubt made good use of it. As has Houses Crickehall, Marbrand and Westerling with their own swords of Valyrian steel, sold to them by Eddard Stark. And now, House Lannick has a sword of Valyrian steel, Tijet thought with pride as he took hold of the sword with both hands. He turned when he heard the slow approach of a horse behind him. There was Tywine, sat on his horse. "Your kill, brother?" he asked. "It was, brother," said Tijet. Tijet swore he could have seen a slight smile on Tywine's lips at this. "A victory for House Lannister that shall be of use in the future, once this war is ended," said Tywine. "Yes, but what of the battle?" "Have we won, Tywine?" asked Tijet. "We have." Eddard Stark emerged victorious on his side of the battlefield. And the Blackfish and Jaime held Mimebatass long enough until the Knights of the Vale finished of the besieging force. And Jaime. Lives. Wounded a few times, but lives and wields a very blooded Brightraw, Tywine said with unmistakable pride. Notes. The battle is an absolute victory, especially with the death of Black Fear. Not a nice man, so no one will mourn his loss, especially not his wife. And now Tijet, having killed Black Fear and claimed the Black Fear sword for his family, has finally emerged from Tywine's shadow. Chapter 137, News from the Warfront. Summary. Lyanna hears the news from the war whilst having her own news to send. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Lyanna 14. A daughter. Lyanna gasped as Joan's apprentice helped her sit up. She panted and gasped for air as Maester Joan cleaned her daughter and wrapped her in towels, whilst she wailed and wept on his table. "She has a fine set of lungs," my lady commented the apprentice. But Lyanna took no notice of him as she remained focused on her daughter. She did not care for the tears falling from her eyes as she continually stared at her daughter. Finally, Maester Joan walked to her side. "She is a healthy little girl, my lady," he said before passing her to Lyanna. Lyanna gasped as she looked down at her. "Gods, she is the most precious little girl in the world." She beamed as she cooed and looked up at Lyanna with curiosity as she ceased weeping. "Hello. Hello," she whispered before gently kissing her forehead. Maester Joan took her daughter and placed her in a nearby cradle. "My lady, you must rest," he said. "No, let me see and hold my daughter," Lyanna wanted to say. But so exhausted was she that she lay down when held down by Maester Joan's apprentices. When at last she woke up, she blinked several times before she could sit up and look around. She was back in her bedchambers. And sat on a chair nearby was Harbert, reading a book of House Baratheon. She also noticed a sealed letter at his side. And two babes wrapped in towels by his side and sleeping in cradles. "You are awake, Lyanna. Are you well?" he asked, noticing her sit up. "I How long have I been asleep? She asked. A few hours. And I thought you could do with some company, with little Gendry here and your beautiful little girl, he said with a smile. She smiled in reply as she looked down at them. Bring her to me, she begged. Harbert put his book and the letter aside before getting up from his chair and picking up her daughter and gently passing her to Lyanna. Did you and Robert think of names? He asked. We did. And I will call her Argella. He smiled approvingly at the name. A fine name for a fine little girl of House Baratheon. Indeed, her namesake was a Storm Queen who did dare the Targaryen invaders to take her home. Though she was not queen for long, her defiant courage in the face of dragons and enemy armies is something to behold, Harbert said with pride. Harbert picked up Gendry and placed him on his lap. He beamed as he played with him and laughed with every word Gendry tried to say. Mercifully, he laughed quietly whilst Lyanna kissed Argella's head and beamed down at her as she slept soundly in her arms. But then she looked up at Harbert. That letter. What is it? She asked. Said Harbert. He reached for the letter whilst Gendry reached out for it. Trying to read it for me to your mother, you cheeky little stag. Already a keen reader, are you? He asked teasingly before he broke open the seal and picked up Gendry and passed the letter to Lyanna. Lyanna carefully opened the envelope when she saw the seal. It was the seal of the stag of House Baratheon. Robert, she realized. She took the parchment from the envelope and began to read it. Lyanna, my love. We have finally defeated the Triarchy and Blackfyr armies. We crushed the last of them at a great battle at a Lysan fortress called Mimebatass. The battle is a battle that the minstrels and troubadours will sing of for generations. I jest not, for there were 93,000 men of houses Baratheon, Stark, Lannister, Tully and Arryn against 150,000 men of Lys, Volantis, Tioche, Myr, Norphos, Qohor and Blackfyr sellswords. Ned slew the enemy commander, Vargid Mariner, and Tywin Lannister's brother, Tijet, slew the cruel Maegor Blackfyr. Whilst we march for the coastlines, our fleets and the Iron Fleet battle with the Triarchy's fleets near the Lysan island chain called New Valyria. The war's end is near. I promise you that, my love. Robert. Lyanna beamed as she finished reading the letter. Then she looked up to see Harbert playing with Gendry with wooden toy bricks, where Gendry had built a tower. Only to knock it down just seconds after he had completed it. Toppling it just as the sea god and goddess of the wind tried to topple Storm's End on Doran Godskreef's seventh attempt, Lyanna thought with a smile. Harbert was chuckling before he noticed Lyanna was watching with a giggly smile. This young stag enjoys wrecking buildings, Lyanna. He will have a mighty storm's fury when he comes of age, he jested with a grin. I am sure that he will, if he is anything like his father, she commented as she turned and carefully climbed out of bed and lay Argella back in her cradle. She took a knee and gently kissed her forehead. What news is there? He asked with a whisper whilst holding Gendry in one of his large and muscular arms. They defeated the last of the Triarchy and Blackfyr armies. Blackfyr and the Triarchy's best general are both dead. They now advance to the coast whilst our fleets battle with the Triarchy's fleets. Notes. Lyanna and Robert now have a daughter called Argella. And the blooded and exhausted army rests before marching to join with the Greyjoys and the fleets. Chapter 138, The Onrushing Tide of Iron and Salt. Summary. Quayan Greyjoy leads the Iron Fleet and the fleets of the Starks, Tullys, Arryns, Baratheons and Lannisters against the remnants of the Triarchy fleet, Volanten fleet and Sell sails. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Harlon 15. By the drowned god, why is the storm god all the way here in the narrow sea? So far away from the Sunset Sea and the Iron Islands. Why does he attack us with thunderbolts and try to shake the world? What would my ever-pious brother, Aaron, say about this? Harlon had learned to fear the thunder as a boy. When he first heard the tales from mother and father of the storm god and how he snuffed out the flames of the Grey King's Hall upon his death. But when he first stepped aboard a ship, the first night he was at sea, he wept when he heard the thunder and saw the storm god stab the sea with lightning. But weeks and moons later, Harlon no longer feared the thunder. After spending so many weeks and moons at sea, with no escaping the storm, Harlon never again felt fear when he saw the thunder. He kept his faith in the drowned god. But still he snarled when he saw the thunder and felt a fearful shiver in his bones. Sail us further. Straight towards their fleet. Harlon roared. He had to shout over the sounds of the rain and waves smashing against the Iron Kraken and the lightning piercing the sea from the sky, the storm god's unseen hand cursing the world. Come on, lads. The day is not over yet. Harlon roared. Indeed, they had taken 4 ships since the battle began. But they were against hundreds of ships. For every ship that Harlon sank and every ship that he had captured, another took their place. Harlon's arms were sore from overuse of both axe and shield. Harlon spotted the approach of his 5th war prize. Another war galley. Built from northern ironwood. And with ballista at the forecastle, as well as archers shooting at them. Shields. Shields up. Harlon roared. He turned to Breaker as he held up his shield to protect both he and his steermaster. Steer us against their center, that we round them, he said. But we won't sink them that way, Lord, he replied. It's not to sink them. Just to batter them long enough for us to board, Harlon replied. Harlon grabbed hold of the balustrade in front of the helm. Hold on to something. Harlon commanded. As they did, Breaker did as he was ordered. Harlon nodded when he saw how the Iron Kraken round into the center of the hull. With any other wood, it would have cracked, and the ship would have split and capsized. But the strength of the ironwood was obvious. For it kept intact, only wounded. Harlon stood tall as he looked at the enemy crew fall around the hull, injured and dazed. Board them. Kill them. Kill them all. Harlon roared as he charged towards the enemy ship. He leapt aboard, his feet landing on the edge of the hull. Harlon pulled himself on, just as more of his crew came aboard. Their crew started to take up arms, still injured and dazed. Harlon swung his axe against an archer's head. He was instantly beheaded before Harlon blocked a sailor's arrow with his shield. Harlon bashed his shield against his face and eviscerated him with salt wave. But he panted as he looked ahead at the many crewmen stood before him and the captain. He charged ahead, cutting down several enemy sailors before he reached the captain. The steermaster swung an arrow at Harlon. Harlon blocked the swing with salt wave before he disarmed him with a swing of his shield at the steermaster's wrist. Before he could scream because of his broken wrist, Harlon had beheaded him. Another sailor came charging at Harlon. Harlon swung salt wave into the sailor's hip. He gasped as Harlon dragged him towards him, before ripping salt wave out of the gaping wound. Harlon proceeded to slice salt wave across, beheading him with a quick strike. Then he turned to the captain. The captain yelled out as he sliced his arrow at Harlon. Harlon blocked the blow with his shield before he parried a second blow aside and bashing his face with the rim of his shield. He screamed before a blow from salt wave removed his head from his neck. How much longer will this battle take? I have sunk 3 ships and captured 4 now. I am exhausted, as are my crew. There she is, Lord. The Black Dragon, yelled Healfdene Pike, Harlon's chief archer. Harlon panted before he gulped at the sight of the flagship. If we take this ship, then we can win. The other ships will balk and flee when they see us take that big bastard. But Harlon wondered how they could take this ship. Father's plan had been for the Iron Fleet to confront the Triarchy fleet and their allies directly. And once the battle was underway, our allies would flank them from west and east. But they are still coming. And that ship. The songs and tales exaggerated nothing. She is like Naga given form as a ship, Harlon thought as he wiped the blood of other men from his face. He turned to his crew, all of whom were staring at the Black Dragon with awe and shock. Back to the Iron Kraken, lads. We still have a battle to fight. Harlon roared. He ran back aboard the Iron Kraken, whilst gazing at the Black Dragon from the helm. It was a 4-master ship, with 4 decks and over 200 oarsmen on both sides. Almost every meter of the ship was protected by a shield hammered down. Harlon nodded when he saw Father sailing the Great Kraken towards it. Aye, Father. We'll take it together. Harlon gulped when he turned to Breaker. Sail us to there. We're taking the Black Dragon, Harlon ordered. He stared at Harlon as though he had gone as mad as Aes the Mad and Harin the Black combined. Do it, Breaker. That is the only way that we win here and can go home, Harlon commanded. Get ready for another fight, boys. We are going to take the Black Dragon. And for this, our names will go down in history and all its plunder aboard is yours. Harlon stared ahead at the Black Dragon. He felt a cold shiver as he looked at it, reminding him of when he would shiver as a boy at seeing a storm at sea or at home in Pike. I am not so easily frightened. I am a Greyjoy of Pike and terror of the seas. Harlon looked at father's ship as it came towards it, and he could see father stood at the forecastle. Harlon drew his spyglass. He snarled in anger at raindrops and seawater splashing against the lenses of his spyglass. But then he caught sight of father's signal. He was holding up a lamp and he held up an arrow against it and then an axe. Father. Prepare a bootleg turn at the forecastle, breaker. Get ready to sail us around, lads. Healfdene. Get ready to shoot on my command. Harlon roared. Aye, Lord. Healfdene shouted in reply. Harlon turned to see the Great Kraken already firing on the Great Lyson flagship. And then Harlon saw Gorold Goodbrother's ship, the Sea Terror, joining the bootleg and board, as father called it. 3 ships. Well, they have 3 castles on that ship, each with dozens of archers. And they have a few ballista at the front. Shoot. Harlon commanded as Goodbrother joined the bootleg and board. Shoot. Healfdene repeated before he let loose his arrow at the closest castle. Harlon did not deign that any of his arrows would have made impact on a ship such as this. And he could see that ramming would have not worked. For not only was it made of ironwood, but it was reinforced with steel shields, making its resistance to ramming all the greater. When do we board her, Lord? Asked Vibald. As soon as we get to the other side of the forecastle. Then we board. And hope that father and Goodbrother have the same idea, Harlon replied as he unsheathed his axe and took hold of his shield. He held on to the balustrade as they made their bootleg turn, keeping them covered from the archers on the castle. Almost there. And as they reached the other side, Harlon ran to the rigging and grabbed a rope. With me, lads. One last time. Together, he roared. What is dead may never die. But rises again. Harder and stronger. Harlon roared as he swung midair. He landed on the forecastle of the Black Dragon. I've done it. I'm aboard. Harlon looked up at the nearest archers on the castle. He ran towards them, with several sailors in his way. Harlon cut 3 down in quick succession before beheading a 4th. The 5th was shot by an arrow and the 5th was killed by a thrown axe. Harlon turned to see his crew join him. Harlon looked up at the archers on the castle and he grabbed the axe embedded in the 5th man's skull and tore it out. He lifted it up and threw it at the nearest archer. He fell from the top and landed on the hull, just as Harlon and Vibald were climbing up the castle with the ladder. Harlon got to the top first and sliced down 5 archers before Vibald had joined him. Harlon kicked one archer down and bashed another down with his shield before an archer stabbed him in the shoulder with a dagger. Harlon roared in fury before he beheaded him. He panted when he realized that these ones were dead. Both he and Vibald climbed back down to the hull to see that the crews of the Sea Terror and the Great Kraken had joined battle. Now the oarsmen below had stopped rowing and were taking up arms. Harlon watched as dozens started charging up. Harlon roared as he charged at the nearest ones, armed only with daggers and oars. It was no fight, but a slaughter. Harlon eviscerated and beheaded at least 20 men within a minute of the oarsmen joining the fray. And he beheaded an officer before he heard a familiar shout of pain. He turned to see father fall to his knees. Father had been shot by 5 arrows. And was wounded at least a dozen times by swords and axes. Father! Harlon roared as he charged towards father. A Valyrian man wearing beautiful and ornate armor held up a shining longsword of a familiar steel stand before father. He could only be Arian Rugaria, High Admiral of Lies, Harlon realized. And the man who wielded their family Valyrian steel sword, Truth. Rugaria raised Truth up high, ready to finish father off. No! Harlon roared. And Rugaria turned to face Harlon. Come and face me, Valyrian bastard. Only for Gorold to attack Rugaria with his one-handed hammer. Father! Harlon roared once again. He ran to father's side. Father panted as he looked up at Harlon. You've done well, Harlon. You are a true Greyjoy and worthy of your place in history. Father, said Harlon. Father tried to speak again. But he gasped as he looked down at his many wounds. And then he collapsed onto his back. His eyes still staring at the thunderstricken sky. Harlon reached for his eyes and shut them. I will take you back home to the Iron Islands, father. You deserve to go to the waters of the Sunset Sea. And to the Drowned God's Hall. And may the mermaid serve your every need. Until we meet again. Harlon turned to see Rugoria thrust at Gorald. Gorald parried the thrust with his shield before swinging his hammer at Rugoria's helm. The helm was knocked from his head, but he was dazed as he struggled to stay standing and with blood pouring down his face. The good brother of Hammerhorn struck Rugoria down with his hammer before taking up his sword. Notes. A sad day for House Greyjoy with the death of the old Kraken. But a great victory all the same. Chapter 139, A Decisive Strike. Summary. Roriger finally makes his move. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Roriger 19. At the edge of Blackwater Bay, the combined Royal Fleet and Reach Fleet began to sail smoothly to the war in Essos. Roriger looked out from his cabin aboard the royal flagship, the Great Dragon. Aboard, he ordered 4 ravens to be sent to the Lords Paramount and to the Master of Ships and Admiral of the Royal Fleet, Lucerys. As he watched the sloops sail to the Great Dragon, Roriger walked with Jon and left Roriger's cabin and found the ship's captain, Sagunsa Sunglass, heir to House Sunglass and Sweetport Sound, stood at the helm. How long until we reach the coast of Lies, Captain? Asked Roriger. The heir to House Sunglass looked at his map and then looked back up at Roriger. Should be another 3 days, Your Grace. 2 if we sail hard throughout the night, he replied. Roriger looked down at the crew on the hull rowing and those on the mast. What would you recommend? He asked. He hummed before glancing at the crew and then giving Roriger his full attention. That depends, Your Grace, if those sailing in the fleet currently will be taking part in any fighting on land. They will not, no, sir. There are soldiers, knights and nobles aplenty aboard the fleets to do all fighting on land, said Jon. Well, in that case, I don't see why they should not row throughout the night. If they will not be doing any fighting, they can ill afford to give complaint, Lord Hand, he said. 2 days it is, Roriger thought as he turned his eye towards the sea. Elia and Mother will handle matters back home well enough. The war should reach its conclusion soon after we join the war in earnest. And once the war is over, Varys will provide me all reports on Stark. If he has so much as breathed a word that could be considered treasonous, then I will break the Treaty of Stokeworth. He did not tell me that he was sailing for Pentos. Nor did he inform me of his campaign. So how can I trust him to tell me the truth of matters in the north? If the true enemy crossed the wall next year, would he lie to me and assure me that the matter was under control? House Targaryen must have unquestioned rule and dominance over the north. My forebears have made the mistake of dismissing the north and looking down on it for generations. It is a place of great importance. And all that Rickard Stark has accomplished only proves that. But if it were under House Targaryen's direct rule, then it will do what is needed. Once under my direct rule, then the north can be fortified properly once the true enemy emerges and invades Westeros. And once it does, the north will be ready. But Eddard Stark cannot be trusted to rule the north and fight them off. He would probably boast that he could do all of that alone. Roriger. Roriger hummed as he turned to Jon. They are here, he said. He gestured to Roriger's good brother Oberyn, Lucerys, Mace Tyrell and Paxter Redwine. My lords. My thanks for coming aboard. Please, join me in my cabin, Roriger invited with a smile. They followed him into his cabin. Roriger sat at the head of the table and with Jon sat at his side. His guests all sat down before Roriger spoke up. He turned to Mother's childhood friend. Lord Valerian, what news is there from the war with our 2 enemies? He asked. Lucerys drew a parchment from his pocket. Roriger noticed that it bore a broken seal. But he could not see what seal it was. The armies of the Triarchy and the Blackfyr army were all defeated at the Lysan fortress Mimebatass by the Lords Stark, Tully, Arryn, Baratheon and Lannister, Your Grace, he said. They are victorious. Excellent. Then this war is all but won. What of the Triarchy's mighty fleet? Lord Valerian?" asked the Lord of the Arbor. "They are defeated, Lord Redwine. At the island chain called New Valyria, Quarian Greyjoy and the other fleets defeated them," he replied. "Even better. Their army is defeated. And so is their fleet. Then, my king, my lords, the path to lies and to end this war is open and clear," said Jon. "Indeed. But, what of Black Phil? Is he in lies, Lord Valerian?" asked Oberyn. "He is not, Prince Oberyn. The villain is dead. He was slain at Mimebatass whilst leading his army," he replied. "Good. And so, ends that foul line. All that is left is lies itself. And Valerie's Daltala." Notes. Roriga leads the fleets for lies and to end the war. Chapter 140, Taking the Advantage. Summary. The Allied armies meet with the Greyjoys. And meet up with Roriga. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Elbereth 18. Elbereth drank thirstily from his waterskin. He looked ahead at the coastline, where the raven from Harlon Greyjoy had told them to meet him and the fleets. It was known as Sunny Haven by the small folk in neighboring villages. And already, Elbereth had spotted a ship bearing the colors of House Greyjoy. Elbereth turned around to the other men of the nobility he rode with. Since the great victory of the Battle of Mimebatass, they had feasted with great pride and joy at the fortress at defeating so great an army and finally slaying the last of the Black Fires. And now they had come to the final part of the war. To take lies. After which, the Triarchy would dissolve, and peace would be made with Volantis. "My lords. The Greyjoys are here." He pointed at the beach, where a dozen Ironborn were climbing from the prow of the ship. Elbereth recognized the ship well. It was the Iron Kraken, the ship of Harlon Greyjoy. Elbereth rode with the nobility of the Five Kingdoms who had fought at the bloody and devastating Battle of Mimebatass, where nearly 250,000 men had fought and bled. It was said that even amongst those who had survived the battle, no man had not shed blood for the battle's end. As they rode close enough, Elbereth recognized the heir to the Iron Islands, who was stood proudly in front of his crew and his ship. But Elbereth noticed how he regarded them with a grim and sorrowful face. What is this? Was his father defeated by the Triarchy's fleet? "My lords, you join us at a time of victory, but at a great cost," he said. "What cost do you speak of, Lord Harlon?" asked Ned. The heir to the Iron Islands fixed a grim expression at Ned, as grim as the ones he used to do normally. "It is Lord Greyjoy now, Lord Stark." The meaning was clear. "My condolences for your loss, Lord Greyjoy," said Elbereth. The Lord Reaper of Pike nodded in thanks to Elbereth. "We heard tell of your great victory at Mimebatass. I regret that we could not have helped," he said. "Ours was a bloody battle, Lord Greyjoy." "But what of your own battles?" asked Brynden. "We won a great victory at New Valyria against the Triarchy's fleets. But my lord father was slain at the battle's conclusion aboard the enemy's flagship, the Black Dragon. No better death than to die in battle in the event of a great victory." "Just what a great warrior such as your lord father would have wanted," said Robert. The Lord Paramount of the Iron Islands smiled and nodded at that. "Our victory at New Valyria and yours, my lords, are not the only victories to speak of." "What? What other victory does he speak of?" "What is your meaning, Lord Greyjoy?" asked Tywin Lannister. "The king led the capture of Lies. The city fell yesterday to the Royal and Redwine fleets. Emissaries from Volantis are sailing for Lies as we speak to negotiate with the king," he said. "What in the seven hells? Roriga actually got his lazy ass off the Iron Throne and has done something." Elbereth turned to the other nobility of the Five Kingdoms. Like he, none of them were expecting news of this. That Roriga would involve himself in the war. But now he had. But only from taking Lies, once the Triarchy and Blackfyre armies were crushed and their allied armies crushed. As well as their fleets and the fleets of their allies. "Is the fleet ready to take us to Lies, Lord Greyjoy?" asked Ned. "Whenever you are ready, Lord Stark, we will set sail for the last of the Triarchy," he replied. Ned nodded and he turned to a few of his men, who had bows and arrows drawn. "Do it," he commanded. They lit their arrows aflame and fired them into the sky. Elbereth looked ahead to see anchored ships send out dinghies towards the beach. The nobility was the first to be embarked upon their ships. But first, they had agreed to meet aboard the flagship of House Lannister, the Great Lion of the Sea. Elbert wondered what could happen at Lys once they were there. He had thought that they would end the war by taking Lys. And that when they did, they would return home to Westeros and to a very grateful King Rhaegar. But now that he had taken the Lys, he had effectively ended the war. And was now ending it on his terms. In Tywin Lannister's cabin, Tywin Lannister and his brother Kevan met with Elbert, Brynden, Robert, Ned and Harlon Greyjoy. As representatives of the Lords Paramount, they decided it was best for they to meet in this way. Will Rhaegar be annoyed that we had won so much glory by fighting all his battles for him? Or will he reward us our rightfully earned due? In Tywin Lannister's cabin, a few squires passed around cups of wine and a few plates of cooked fish and lobster. When they left, Tywin spoke up. My lords, it goes without saying that this war concludes in ways that none of us here could have anticipated, he said. True. I had thought that the king would have stayed out the war and would reward us upon our return home once the Triarchy was dissolved and Black Fear was dead, added Harlon Greyjoy. Where does this leave us? Asked Elbert. Surely the king will still reward us for all that we have done. He couldn't have taken Lys had we not done the fighting for him. From the Red Beach to New Valyria, Robert pointed out. I am not so sure, Lord Baratheon, said Kevan Lannister, or Castellan or whatever his name was now. Why is that? Asked Ned. What my brother means, Lord Stark, is that a man in the king's position would be annoyed at the fact that you had led the campaign in Essos and won so many great victories. In doing so, he will be envious that he was not leading those battles as Daeron the young dragon won his victories in Dorne, said the old lion of Casterly Rock. So, Lord Lannister, what you are saying is that all of our efforts will have been for nothing now that he has taken Lys and has Daltala and the Triarchy at his mercy, asked Elbert. Indeed, he said unflinchingly. Damn him. 3,000 Valymen died in this war. And another 6,000 were wounded. They all did so for him. And now it was all for nothing. What will we do then, Lord Lannister? Throw ourselves at his mercy and lick his boots like lickspittles? Asked Harlon Greyjoy. No, I will speak with the Queen and the Queen Dowager upon our return to King's Landing. They are both reasonable and not illogical. And they should speak on our behalf and to ensure that our efforts are recognized and not forgotten. So long as we all behave accordingly before the king in Lys, then all should be well, he reminded them. Eddard Xxei. The Valyrian dragon lords of old considered this place a paradise in the glory days of the Valyrian freehold. I can see why. Though it bears the foul and despicable stench of slavery. I could never live here. Not where a man's freedom can be bought with only some coin. Eddard frowned as he looked around Lys from the steps of the great council chambers of Lys, where all the magisters of Lys and the first magister congregated and argued before issuing decrees for Lys and its lands on the mainland, or on efforts to secure their claim on the disputed lands. As he entered at the head of the nobility of the north, he looked around at the nobility who were already present. He saw the nobility of the Crown lands, of Dorne and of the Reach. He frowned with anger at hearing them talk of the fighting as they take Lys. As though such deeds would be recorded for all troubadours of the Seven Kingdoms to sing of for centuries. You boot-licking southern lickspittles. You did fucking nothing. Where were you Crownlanders at the Red Beach? Where was the Dornish during MYR? Where were the Reachmen whilst we fought and bled at Mimebatass? And where was the glorious Red Wine Fleet during the fighting at New Valyria? Eddard glared angrily as he looked around and heard the boastful voices of those nobility who did next to nothing in this war. By what right have they to boast? Any man who fought at Mimebatass deserves to boast of his deeds for all his family and his people to hear for generations. But none of you deserve to boast for what? For taking an unguarded city that couldn't have had more than 5,000 men guarding it. But Eddard remembered the words of Tywin Lannister as he resisted the urge to twitch and turn into his first form as a werewolf. Instead, he felt calmer as he stood with his friends Robert and Elbert. They stood at the center of the great council chambers. Whilst looking around at elaborate and highly decorative Valyrian glyphs and imagery on the marble on the floors and on the walls. Looking around, Eddard spotted him. He spotted Rhaegar Targaryen, who was stood by what could only be the high seat of the First Magister. And stood beside him was a short man with balding hair and a neatly trimmed beard of silver blonde Valyrian hair. Valerys Daltala, Eddard realized when he remembered the description provided by Wyman Daly. Eddard glared when he saw Daltala smirk at Roriga. He honed his hearing to the two men when he saw Daltala's lips move. A great victory for you, your grace. Though it is your only one. For all the glory goes to Eddard Stark, Quayan Greyjoy, Robert Baratheon, Elbereth Arryn, Brynden Tully and even Tywin Lannister, said the former First Magister with a self-satisfied smirk on his face. Well, at least someone recognizes all our efforts. But the fact that it was my enemy and not my king which truly insults me. Roriga glared as he stared down at the former First Magister. You have taken it very well that you will soon die, Magister, Roriga snarled. I have done what I could do. Others will pick up the pieces and repair what was broken. Black Fira may be dead, but he was merely a means to an end. But the memory of the Triarchy, and all that it accomplished. No, it is not dead. Not when it accomplished so much and in such a few years also. The memory of the Triarchy will remain. But the same cannot be said for stability in Westeros, he replied. Eddard raised a brow at that. In Westeros. When I crushed you at every turn. But then, Eddard heard a hearty laughter from the First Magister. You did. I do beg your pardon, your grace. But I was given to understand that it was all Eddard Stark and Quayan Greyjoy. But you. You will always be shadowed by your own bannermen. Indeed, how long before they plot against you? How long before you are forgotten and they plot to have their daughters wed to young Aegon? Eddard saw how Roriga frowned. He could smell his anger from where he was stood. He could also smell blood emanating from Roriga's arm. Cut yourself on the Iron Throne, did you, Roriga? And even if Eddard could not hear Roriga's heart beating, he would still know that his anger only increased tenfold when he laid eyes on Eddard. What is he doing? Asked Robert. Eddard turned to see Robert looking at Roriga. Probably lost an argument with Daltala. From what I know, the man's tongue is as sharp as Valyrian steel, replied Eddard. I would have paid a lot of money to have heard that, Elbereth commented. Just say the word, old friend, and I will write down for you, word for word, what was said. But before they could idle any longer, Trold Hightower made his voice heard. Order. The king commands for order. As his voice echoed throughout the great council chambers, all voices quietened down until there was silence and all eyes turned to face the king, as he stood with Daltala, whom was being closely guarded by Jeffrey and Barristan Selmy. My lords. At long last, the war which directly threatened all kingdoms of Westeros, has at last come to an end, with the end of the Triarchy and the death of the last of the Black Fires, he announced with his arms outstretched, as though he was as great a warrior king as Daeron the young dragon, Maegor the cruel or Aegon the conqueror. Eddard rolled his eyes. Robert scoffed in disbelief. Elbereth shook his head in annoyance. Brynden sighed impatiently through his nose. Harlon Greyjoy grunted quietly in annoyance. And Tywin Lannister merely glared, as always would. The war has cost the lives of many good men of all kingdoms of Westeros. From lowborn to highborn. From Dawn to the north. But not one of these sacrifices were in vain. For now, we might enjoy peace. Not only amongst ourselves, but with our neighbors across the narrow sea. He glared briefly at Daltala, who was looking around with indifference. Roriga was right about one thing though. He doesn't look frightened or furious about whatever fate Roriga has in store for him. Does that mean he has an escape planned? Or does he know something that we do not? The Triarchy shall once again be dissolved, forming the free cities of Myr, Lys and Teosh once again. For the time being, there will be no reparations to be paid for the war's costs. But for the next 5 years, whilst the free cities that once warred with us, should show any hint of discord or plots against the 7 kingdoms, then the punishment shall be severe. Before he turned once again to face his subjects. I would like to thank all the men in this room who have made this great victory possible. For this war, which did so frighten many a man in the 7 kingdoms and force us to prepare to defend the crown lands, it was with incredible courage that the North and the Iron Islands did invade Pentos and Myr on my command to so distract the enemy. Though not even I could have imagined how much damage they would have inflicted upon our enemies, my lords. Eddard wanted to throw ice at Roriger and kill any man that dared to try and attack him for it. It annoyed him how he played for the audience of lickspittles that applauded and cheered his oratory skills and his silver tongue. A pity that you could not have been with us from the start. I am sure that you had far more important matters to attend to, such as reading ancient tomes and manuscripts and claiming that you are the prince that was promised. This is the only time that I regret doing as Ash suggested. Perhaps I should have left him to fend for himself. And fight the Triarchy and the Black Fires on his own. And see how his leadership would have fared against the likes of Balak-Wodraha, Kul-Balak-Ho, Vargid Mariner and Magor Blackfear. My lords. Once matters have concluded herein lies, with terms of peace and my conditions being met by the free cities of Norphos, Qohor, Pentos, Volantis, Tiosh, Myr and Lies, we shall sail home and I shall award all deserving men as they deserve for bringing this great victory to the Seven Kingdoms, he said grandly. But Eddard could smell the stench of deception reeking from him as he made this speech. What does he intend to do now? Notes. I personally hate it when someone takes the credit for something they didn't do. Which Roriger is doing to try and save face, much to the anger of not one, not two but 6 kingdoms of West Eos. Chapter 141, Protective Brother. Summary. Elia learns of what Roriger is doing. And Oberyn makes a decision. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Elia XX. May this be good news, Elia inwardly hoped as she stood with Roller and Baelor. Varys had just come with news from the war and Roriger, Jon, Oberyn and Lucer is sailing with the Royal Fleet and the Red Wine Fleet, containing the armies of the Crown Lands, Dorne and the Reach, over 2 weeks after Tywin Lannister and the Westerlands army set sail to join the war. My queens, there has been a victory. The king has taken the City of Lies. Varys Daltala is dead after killing himself with poison. And the Triarchy has been dissolved, he proclaimed. Elia exhaled deeply upon hearing the news. And what of Blackfear? Asked Roller. Your Grace, he is dead. At a great battle at the Lysan fortress of Mimebatass, Magor Blackfear was slain by Tijet Lanek. The entire Triarchy army and Blackfear army was defeated by Eddard Stark, Elbereth Arryn, Robert Baratheon, Brynden Tully and Tywin Lannister, he stated. And their fleet, Lord Varys? Asked Baelor. Also defeated, Sir Baelor. Days before the king attacked and took Lies, Quayan Greyjoy defeated the Triarchy's fleet as well as their Volanten allies at an island chain called New Valyria. Though Lord Greyjoy was slain in the battle by the Triarchy admiral, he lived long enough to know that they were victorious. Then, it is all over. It truly is over. The greatest war that the Seven Kingdoms has known since the Dance of the Dragons and Daeron's invasion of Dorne is finally over. And we have won. Thank you for this news, Lord Varys, said Roller. As he bowed to them, Elia turned to Roller and Baelor. I shall proclaim our victory to the court, Elia said. She left to go to the throne room, accompanied by Arthur and Oswell. In the throne room, dozens of nobles and courtiers, those who didn't take up arms to fight, all gathered as Elia sat on the Iron Throne. Silence for Her Grace, the Queen. Arthur bellowed. There was silence in the throne room. Elia smiled as she sat down. My lords and ladies, the war is at last over. After 2 great victories in Lies, against the Triarchy and Blackfear armies at Mimebatass and against the Triarchy and Volanten fleets at New Valyria, the Seven Kingdoms has emerged victorious. And His Grace, the King, has captured the City of Lies. The enemies of the Iron Throne, Varys Daltala and Magor Blackfear are both dead, and with them, the Triarchy is dissolved and the traitorous line of Blackfear is ended. All clapped and cheered at the news before Elia spoke again. The king now concludes matters in Lies in ensuring that there is peace between the Seven Kingdoms and the free cities, especially the free cities that once made up the Triarchy. But once all is finished, the king shall return to King's Landing and proclaim all rewards to those brave bannermen who fought with such courage and tenacity to make this victory possible. She left with Arthur and Oswell accompanying her. As they left the throne room, Elia saw Baelor holding a letter. Sir Baelor, what is this? She asked. This letter, my queen, has just come by Raven. It is for you, from Prince Oberyn, he replied before handing the letter to her. Thank you. That will be all, she replied gently. She winked at Baelor as he left. Elia retired to Maegor's Holdfast and to her chambers, where she at last broke the seal of Oberyn's letter, hoping that the contents of the letter were not what she feared them to be. Anxiously sat in her chambers, Elia drew the letter from the envelope. Ever since Roriger had set sail with the fleets and armies of the Crown lands, the Reach and Dawn, she had tasked Oberyn with keeping an eye on Roriger. For ever since he became king, Roriger was infuriated at Ned and at House Stark, claiming that it was only under House Targaryen's direct command that the North could hold out the monsters of his night terrors. But Elia knew that Ned was the only man that Roriger feared. She had known this ever since the Treaty of Stokeworth. And now she feared that Roriger was going to make relations between the Iron Throne and the North even worse. Elia, dearest sister. It is as you have feared, I am sorry to say. Roriger became even more infuriated towards Eddard Stark, especially after speaking with Varys Daltala in Ly's great council chambers. And in a grand speech to the nobility of the realm, he made a grand gesture that rewards would be gifted to those who fought with exception in the war. But as he finished the speech, I saw him very well. I saw the looks he gave Eddard Stark. Just from looking at him, I can see that the legends they tell of the young wolf are no exaggeration. He looked as though he could wipe out the entire Kingsguard with a single swing of his great sword before ripping Roriger's head off with his bare hands. However, Roriger does not see this. I am certain that he will do what he can to try and aggravate Stark into doing something reckless and foolish. Just like me if were I in his position. Should he do so, I am certain that it will not end well for the Seven Kingdoms. Oberyn. Damn you, Roriger. Damn you to the seven hells. Why must you be so fucking petty that you would want to provoke Ned after all he has done to save you? He brought hope when all seemed lost. And now you want to punish him for it. Interlude 13. Oberyn Martell, Romulo Estrella. I have few regrets, Roriger Targaryen. But my chief among them is taking my sister away from the heir to Old Town, who was enamored with my sister since the day that we had met him. For if I had not, you would not be endangering her or her children with your plots against the Starks. The Starks who did all your fighting for you. And by reputation, Eddard Stark is not a man to anger. He has slaughtered men in the hundreds and thousands. Were he a Dornishman during Daeron's invasion, even more armies of Northrends would have been slaughtered. Perhaps he might have even led an army to King's Landing and done to the capital what we had done to Highgarden during the Anarchy. As Oberyn was Roriger's guest aboard the Great Dragon, he watched his good brother carefully, wondering if this man was indeed irredeemable or not. For just from hearing his speeches in Lies and in the Red Keep, Oberyn held his suspicions. But for now, he kept them to himself, rather than put Elia in danger. But now, Oberyn had spotted the perfect opportunity. He smirked when he spotted a large cut on his left arm. The scar ran from Roriger's wrist to his elbow. Cut from the Iron Throne, Oberyn understood. And yet, so easily usable, Oberyn thought. Oberyn looked around at the other guests inside Roriger's cabin. Now that the war was over and peace was made with 7 of the 9 free cities, over 500 ships were sailing home to Westeros. First for King's Landing to listen to Roriger's decrees on rewards for those whom fought with exception. But Oberyn could see what Roriger was plotting. He will endanger my sister should he try and antagonize Eddard Stark. The young wolf has proven to be of great help to Dorne. His beautiful wife, lovely Ash, has agreed to enter a trade alliance with Doran, and through it, Dorne shall soon have Valyrian roads, aqueducts and canals. And then there is a fact that he is a warrior with no equal. If he could easily defeat Barristan Selmy and Tyjet Lannister and slay Vargid Mariner, then he is not someone who can be easily killed. I have met Vargid Mariner many times, as a sellsword and in the fighting pits. And he remains one of the few men who are a match for me. At least until the young wolf killed him. Oberyn looked up when he saw Lucerys Valerian approach Roriger. Give me a good reason to not kill you, Roriger. I beg you. For if you can be reasoned with, all the better. But if you want to make an enemy of Eddard Stark, then that will only put Elia and her children in danger. And I would die before I let that happen. What happens on our return, my king? Asked the Lord of the Tides. Rewards will be granted to all whom fought well in the war. And there are those who must be dealt with, said the so-called last dragon. Upon hearing that, Oberyn's black and viperous eyes narrowed at the final words. Dealt with. Do specify. Dealt with, my king. Whom do you mean? Asked the Lord Commander of the King's Guard. Those who take the war into their own hands. Who would steal my glory? Who would boast as if they had won the war on their own? And would think to humiliate their king, he replied with high pomposity. Oberyn rolled his eyes as he looked down at his shoes. It is just as Elia had said. Fear not, beloved sister. This maggot will not endanger you or your children. I will see to it, personally. Oberyn's eyes darted to Roriger's wound as he stretched his arm out. He winced at accidentally hitting his arm on his desk. Oh, your grace. Is your arm sore in pain? Allow me to relieve you of your pain. The red viper reached into the inside pocket of his jerkin. He never went anywhere without a select few of the best poisons of his own making. He had called it bitter blood. And now he picked the best one that he could. One to apply to a wound. And within a day, the recipient would die of infection. Kings have been known to die from infections on cutting their arms on the Iron Throne. Maegor the Cruel died on the Iron Throne. And many still think that any who die on the Iron Throne die because they were considered unworthy. Let them believe that said curse has struck again, Oberyn thought as Oberyn sipped his wine and looked down at the cup. With an idea. He grinned as he considered that this idea would work. Oberyn quickly emptied the contents of bitter blood into his half-full wine cup. Just as quickly, he placed the empty bottle back in the inside pocket of his jerkin. And he approached his good brother. Just as he was writing a letter. Where is this for, Roriger? Asked John Connington. Instructions for Elia in King's Landing, he replied before Oberyn made a show of losing his footing. He fell to his knee, spilling most of his wine onto Roriger's armrest. The left arm. He did not dare to smirk when he saw the contaminated wine spill on it and cover the wood. Roriger, good brother, forgive me, Oberyn said with an amorous grin, as he would usually do. That's fine, Oberyn. Just take your drinking to your ship now and save your amorous encounters for our return to the capital, Roriger replied with an irritated expression whilst rolling his eyes. Of course. Good night to you both, he said with a mocking bow before biting his lips in the direction of John Connington. Oh, does your heart belong to Roriger in more ways than one? Well, it is no wonder that you despise Elia so. Just be glad that you aren't next. But as Oberyn walked to the hull and climbed down onto the sloop that would take him to House Martell's flagship, Nymaria's Star, he grinned. The poison won't take long to take effect. But once it does, there is no escape. I promised you a long time ago that I would never let any harm come to you, sister. And I meant it. Notes. Poor Elia, having to always fix Roriger's mistakes. Though that shouldn't be a problem for much longer if Oberyn has anything to do with it. Chapter 142, A Regency. Summary. The aftermath of the war is cleared up in the Red Keep. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Lucerys 15. He was only king for 2 years. He did heal wounds inflicted upon the realm after his father's mad reign. And he was king at the time of the most trying time in the history of the Seven Kingdoms ever since the Dance of the Dragons. But he could very well have inflicted an even more nagging wound should he have pursued in his desires to punish Eddard Stark. Lucerys looked up at the Iron Throne to hear the proclamations of Rolla and the ruling Queen Regent of the Seven Kingdoms. Queen Elia was now regent to King Aegon, whom was a boy of 3. Lucerys already knew half of what was to be announced. All from his talks with Rolla. He glanced around the throne room at all the nobility gathered there. And as he looked around, he noticed the faces of the lords of the Crown Lands and the Reach, who looked expectantly at the Queen, in the hopes of being rewarded greatly, for whatever great contributions they thought to have made in the war. In comparison to those who had actually fought. The lords of the Iron Islands, the North, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, the Vale and the Westerlands. Though the Westerlands joined late in the war, it could be argued that their contributions were far more significant than the Crown Lands, the Reach and Dawn, for they had fought in the battles of Mimetitas and New Valyria. And when Lucerys saw the faces of the lords paramount of those kingdoms who had fought in the many battles, he wondered what would happen. He knew what would have happened were the king still alive. But he knew that Elia was more reasonable and understanding than her late husband. The Queen Regent was sat on the Iron Throne. And Rolla was stood her right. and stood at her left was Roriger's hand of the king, John Connington. All were silent across the throne room as the Queen Regent gently cleared her throat before she spake. Lucerys was stood alongside Varys, Pycelle and Baelor Hightower as the Queen Regent spoke. When she spoke, Lucerys admired how she spoke with conviction and purpose, which contrasted to her delicate health and frail body. Though this war concluded with victory, it ends with a great sadness for the Seven Kingdoms. For as we gather to celebrate the great victory that was won against the old enemies of the Seven Kingdoms, we also gather to mourn the passing of our late king, Roriger Targaryen, said the Queen Regent. After a moment of silence, the Queen Regent continued. But now, the Crown Prince, Aegon, shall not be crowned king until he is of age at 6 and 10. Until then, a Regency Council shall see to it that the Crown Prince is raised to be the king that the realm needs. The Regency Council are as follows: Lord Kevan of House Castellon, Sir Brynden of House Tully, Lord Lucerys of House Valerian, Prince Oberyn of House Martell, Sir Garth of House Hightower, Sir Aemon of House Estermont and Lord Galbart of House Glover. Lucerys smiled at that. He had asked to be placed on the Regency Council. I am tired of King's Landing. And I am certain that I will be exhausted of the intrigues and the Game of Thrones by the time that the king comes of age. And when he does, I shall happily retire from court politics and return home to Driftmark and make up for all the time I have missed with my sons and my future grandchildren. Those chosen for the Regency Council smiled at being chosen and were applauded by the others in the court. As he expected, the lords of the Iron Islands were far from interested. Though Lucerys was glad to have the chance to meet with Harlon earlier, whom was now Lord Paramount of the Iron Islands. Now the small council. I hope that my chosen successor will be a good choice. I have been master of ships for nearly 10 years. And in that time, I have spent less than a year at home. I need to feel the wind on my back and breathe in the fresh air of the sea as I walk through high tide and ride across my island. And as for the small council, the positions of Grand Maester, Master of Whispers and Lord Commander of the King's Guard remain unchanged. After Lord Valerian's choice to step down from his post and join the Regency Council, I have decreed that his replacement shall be Sir Robin of House Greyjoy. Lucerys turned and looked at Harlon's youngest brother, whom Harlon had said was to be awarded a lordship of one of the many newly recovered islands of the Iron Islands but had changed his mind at Lies. Robin Greyjoy, a boy of 6 and 10, walked towards the Iron Throne before he knelt to the Queen Regent. For a boy of that age, he was clearly a battle-hardened warrior. Lucerys saw that on the armor he wore. A black suit of steel plate armor with the golden kraken of House Greyjoy on the chest and on the pauldrons. All of which was covered in scars and dents. And his own face and hands were covered in scars. My thanks for your trust in me, Your Grace. I can only hope to live up to it, he said. I am certain that you shall, Lord Robin, said the Queen Regent before Robin Greyjoy stood with the rest of the small council, nearing the Lord Commander in height when he stood beside him. A Greyjoy as Master of Ships. A fine choice. So long as he believes as his brother and late father believed. The position of Master of Coin is granted to Lord Wyman of House Marndale. The corpulent Lord of White Harbour waddled slowly before the Iron Throne before bowing to the Queen Regent. It is a great honor to be chosen for the role, my Queen. And it is one I vow to uphold to the best of my ability. I am certain that you shall, Lord Marndale, she replied with a smile. And finally, the position of Master of Laws is granted to Lord Yone of House Royce, said the Queen Regent. The tall and muscular Lord of Runestone bowed before the Queen Regent. I thank you for this great honor, Your Grace, and I vow to uphold all the laws of the land and ensure that all the realm are subject to them, from the most low-born small folk to the higher echelons of the nobility. Well said. I like him better than his predecessor already. The positions of Master of Coin and Master of Laws both became vacant after Miles Mouton and Richard Lunmouth decided to return to their respective homes. After tiring of King's Landing and were saddened after the death of their childhood friend, the King. Though John Connington chose to stay on, to help the son and heir of his dear friend. Those gathered in the audience all applauded the choices of the small council before the Queen Regent spoke again. And now I would like to declare rewards for all houses who did take part in the war. Lord Harlon of House Greyjoy, please step forth. Harlon bowed before the Iron Throne. My Queen, he said simply. Lord Greyjoy, I would first like to offer my condolences for the death of your father, she said kindly. "You are very kind to say so, my queen," he replied. Without wasting further time, the Queen Regent continued. "And I am proud to announce that House Greyjoy and the Iron Islands is now permitted to build their trading posts in both the Reach and the Westerlands. And I would welcome any further efforts to build such trading posts across the Narrow Sea," she announced. "Perfect. Just what Quayan would have wanted," Lucerys thought when he saw how the nobles gathered around all applauded the Lord Paramount of the Iron Islands. It took a war for them to earn respect. But they at last have the respect that they fought so hard for. As he returned to his brothers, the Queen Regent continued by awarding lands to various lords, awarding a certain amount of gold and promoting certain houses from knightly houses to lordships such as houses Seaworth, Selmy, Tallheart, Glover, Cox, Hardine, Templeton, Clegane, Sarsfield and Vicary. It didn't escape Lucerys' notice how all the selected houses were all houses of the kingdoms which had fought in the war in Eddard Stark's campaign. And finally, she came to the last of those to be awarded. Lord Eddard of House Stark. As the renowned young wolf walked from his bannerman to the Iron Throne, the entire throne room gossiped as he made his way to the Iron Throne. He bowed to the Queen Regent. "My queen," he said with a gruff and hearty northern voice. "Lord Stark, though there was once a time when you were an enemy of House Targaryen, for no faults to House Stark, your conduct in this war has proven otherwise. You have indeed proven yourself to be a warrior without equal and a commander unlike any the realm has seen since the days of Aegon the Conqueror." Many gossiped around the throne room of the compliments the Queen Regent gave to the young wolf. Lucerys noticed how many looked at him with admiration, whilst Mace Tyrell looked at him with annoyance and anger. Is he still bitter about Juniper Hall? Now would not be a good time to be bitter about that. It is with great pleasure that I grant you the legal rights to award the new castles and city you build in the north to whomsoever you deem worthy, whether your unlanded bannermen or your own future sons you may have. He smiled at that before bowing again. "My thanks, my queen," he said. As he rejoined his bannermen, all of whom were applauding, the Queen Regent stood from the Iron Throne. "My lords and ladies, on a final note, I have the following proclamations to announce. These last few days, myself, the Queen Dowager and Hand of the King have made the upcoming betrothals between House Targaryen and the following houses. My eldest daughter, Princess Rhaenys, shall wed Lord Harold of House Arryn. My youngest daughter, Princess Visenya, shall wed the future eldest son of Sir Edmure Tully. My good sister, Princess Daenerys, shall wed the future eldest son of Sir Jaime Lannister. And of course, my son, the Crown Prince, shall wed the Lady Lyanna of House Stark. In making these betrothals, she now secures houses Stark, Arryn, Tully and Lannister to House Targaryen." Lucerys realized as he noted the many angry mutters and gossiping about the final marriage betrothal from many lords and ladies of the south that their own daughters were not chosen. Most noteworthy were Mace Tyrell. "I shall be very glad to leave this all behind when I finally retire and return home to Driftmark for good." Notes. Lucerys decides to be a part of the Regency Council after having enough of court politics. Chapter 143, Prioritizing the Homeland. Summary. Robert returns home and organizes a welcome home treat for his bannerman. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Lyanna 15. At long last. The war is finally over. And they all return home. Ned returns home to Winterfell. And Robert comes back to Storm's End. Lyanna could not help but smile as she stood in the courtyard of the Round Hall with her family. She kissed Argella gently as she rested in her arms, oblivious to all around her. "Your father will be so happy to meet you for the first time, little one," she whispered before kissing her once again. Lyanna looked up at the gates when she heard the trotting of what sounded like dozens of horses. The gates to the Round Hall opened. And the first to pass through was Robert, Stannis and even Davos. She beamed at seeing all three of them. And then she saw how the bannermen of all the Stormlands were following closely behind them. Lyanna stood ready to greet Robert with Argella in her arms and Gendry stood up, whilst holding the hand of his uncle Renly. Lyanna beamed at Robert as he beamed at her. And she glanced at the nobility of the Stormlands who had followed Robert into Storm's End. All had come for a feast which Lyanna, Harbert and Renly had been organizing since Robert's letter to them whilst he was still in King's Landing. As Robert climbed down from his horse, Gendry beamed, instantly recognizing his father. Papa, he said excitedly before running straight for Robert. Robert chucked heartedly before taking a knee and picking up Gendry and gently hugging him. Gendry. My boy. Gods, I have missed you, lad, he boomed before kissing his forehead. Robert put him back down and held his hand as they walked together to Lyanna. My lady, Robert said with a beaming smile and loving eyes. My lord, she replied before leaning in and kissing him. Robert longingly held the kiss as he stroked her hair. As he broke from the kiss, he looked down at Argella. And is this beautiful girl my daughter? He asked with a beaming smile. Lyanna smiled at how Robert adored Argella and planted a soft kiss on her forehead as she awoke and looked at him with curious eyes. She did not wail or weep as Lyanna gently passed her to her father. You are the most beautiful girl in all the Stormlands, aren't you? Get that all from your beautiful mother, isn't that right? He asked her. Lyanna giggled when she saw how Argella smiled at Robert. Robert passed Argella back to Lyanna before turning to the nobility of the Stormlands. My lords. Until your families all have come for the grand feast we shall host in Storm's End, you are all most welcome to Storm's End. Robert boomed for them all to hear. Robert turned to Renly as they all began to climb down from their horses and were being escorted to their quarters by Rugger. Renly. Brother. You've grown taller. Nearly 10 now. Lyanna has been telling me how helpful you have been to her. I have, Robert. And I've been a good uncle to Gendry and Argella, he said with pride. And I would never have doubted it. Robert said before patting his back and hugging him before he turned to Harbert. Uncle, he said before hugging him. Robert, Harbert said affectionately before patting his back. We've been hearing a great many tales of you and the mighty Stormlands army since you arrived in Pentos. From Myr to Myrmebetas. What glory you have brought yourself and House Baratheon, he said. And proudly too, Uncle, Robert replied. And I would never think otherwise of you. Lyanna walked with Robert inside the round hall before passing Argella to Nara to take her to the nursery, where Renly was taking Gendry. We heard of Rhaegar's death and that there is a regency. Does any of it involve the Stormlands? Asked Lyanna. It does not. And at my personal request, Robert replied. What do you mean? Asked Harbert. I do not want the Targaryens involved with House Baratheon and the Stormlands. It was because of a marriage match between us and them that started Lenal Baratheon's rebellion against the Iron Throne. And it saw Grandfather Ormond killed at the Stepstones. And it saw father and mother die trying to find a pure Valyrian bride for my late cousin. I want us focused on the Stormlands first and foremost before we focus on our relations with the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. Lyanna noticed how proudly Harbert looked at Robert for this statement. He patted his shoulder. Well said, Robert. Well said, indeed, he said with a beaming smile. If we are to do that, Robert, where do we start? Asked Lyanna. Robert pursed his lips before they arrived at his solo with Maester Joan. I was thinking of making marriage matches between our children and with the nobility of the Stormlands. Within reason and once they are old enough for such arrangements to be made, of course. Obviously, Viserys Targaryen will be taken into consideration when he comes of age and is made Lord of Summerhall and forms his own noble house and becomes a bannerman of House Baratheon, Robert said as he sat down at his chair. Good. I want our children to wed those they want to wed. Rather than wed and have unhappy marriages. And Robert is wise to focus on the Stormlands first rather than trying to make grandiose marriage matches like Hoster Tully with other Lords Paramount or with the Targaryens. They have inflicted too much pain upon House Stark and House Baratheon. Even if the ones who committed such foul deeds are dead, it doesn't change what happened. Which houses should we prioritize, Robert? Asked Harbert. Perhaps the most powerful houses, my lord. Such as the Tarths, Conningtons and Swans. Maester Joan. No. Not the Conningtons, not whilst that Askissa is hand of the king. He would never agree to any match anyway, he replied. Perhaps the Swans, then. Gillian Swan has a young son a few years older than Gendry, called Donal, Harbert suggested. Robert turned to Lyanna. As you said, once our children are old enough. And we know enough to know that they are good matches for our children, she replied. Yes, of course. And what about Gendry? What matches for him? Asked Robert. Perhaps the Carons of Night Song. I have heard it said that Lord Brian has 2 young daughters. Perhaps they could be held under consideration. At least for the time being. Harbert offered. For the time being, uncle. But for now, we shall focus on the feast, and meet the bannermen, said Robert. Or better yet, do what father did at feasts in Winterfell. It would do good to hear each of the bannermen out. Especially on matters that affect their lands and peoples. Might I suggest something for the feast, Robert? Lionel asked. Of course, my love, he replied as the 3 men turned to her. What my lord father would always do in a feast at Winterfell, was invite different bannermen to his side and hear out what they had to say. Whether it was naught but good news or ill, father would always hear them out and offer what help he could provide. Robert and Harbert opened their eyes wide at the idea. A fine idea, Robert said with a nod. Yes. And a good chance to see what ails they or their noble house, if anything. And we can host a small tourney. Or even a melee. Harbert suggested. Perhaps for the squires, rather than the knights and lords, so as to give the squires a chance of knighthood. Lionel added. Good ideas, all around. Yes, this feast at Storm's End shall be a grand one for the Stormlands, Robert said with pride. Notes. Because of how his great-grandparents, his granddad and parents have all either been insulted or killed because of the Targaryens, Robert chooses to focus on the Stormlands first and foremost rather than being like Hoster Tully or Tywin Lannister and making alliances with neighboring countries or desperately trying to marry off to the Targaryens. Chapter 144, The Young Lion and the Cat. Summary. Tywin and Jaime return home to the Rock. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Catelyn 11. Tywin and Jaime. Catelyn thought as she looked from where she was stood alongside Tyrion, Cersei, Jenna and Aemon. Though a so-called knight, the man did not take up arms against the enemies of the 7 kingdoms nor even leave with the army and the fleet of the Westerlands. Jaime rode proudly into the courtyard of Casterly Keep. Catelyn could see it on how he rode his horse. He held his head up high as any true Lannister should. And she noticed how his armor was scarred and dented. Even his own cape bearing the roaring lion of House Lannister was torn and scarred. Catelyn recognized the signs of battle on Jaime, Tywin and the knights, squires and soldiers who accompanied them. She had seen plenty of it on Uncle Brynden upon his return to Riverrun after the end of the Northern Rebellion. A fact which she kept secret from her new family now. Several stable hands ran to the approaching Lannisters and knights and took hold of the reins as they dismounted from their horses. Tywin and Jaime both faced Catelyn, for it was she and not Tyrion, nor Cersei, nor Jenna and especially not Aemon who had been placed in charge of stewardship and ruling the Westerlands until their return from the war. My lord. Welcome home to Casterly Rock, said Catelyn. Tywin fixed his gaze upon Catelyn before approaching her. Will he disapprove of what I have started building in the Westerlands? Surely he must have seen for himself just how beneficial and advantageous it all is on his journey here from the Crown Lands. I saw that much construction has begun on the roads. To what end? He asked. Out of her corner of her eye, she noticed Cersei smirking as though relishing the thought of Tywin angrily dismissing her and suggesting that House Lannister didn't need the help that was provided by the Northerners. Cersei's obsession with all things of House Lannister will be her undoing. Especially when she weds Willers Tyrell and becomes the future Lady of Highgarden. To build Valyrian roads, my lord. As they have been built in the north, the Riverlands, the Vale and the Stormlands. After a trading deal was negotiated with Asher Stark of Winterfell on my behalf, she replied. He raised a brow at that, but his face betrayed no approval or disapproval of her actions. What will he say? Surely he will see the logic in all that was done. And what does this agreement entail? He asked. For their geological experts, architects and artisans to come to the Westerlands to build improvements, uncover further places to mine, to build terrace farms in the hills, to build dams to help with water production and to enhance the roads by widening the roads and adding stone and oil onto them, making them as strong and sturdy as the Valyrian roads you will have seen in the free cities. He lowered his brow as he took in all that she said. Catelyn made a quick glance at Jaime as he stood by his father's side. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled when he saw Catelyn. Finally, when Catelyn turned her eyes back to Tywin, he nodded. You have done well, Caitlin. I saw plenty of the Valyrian roads of lies in the campaign there. And you were wise to make this agreement with the Starks. I was planning to do the same, he said before leaving her side. That went better than I would have hoped. Indeed, Caitlin noticed how annoyed Cersei was that hadn't gone as she wanted. Caitlin turned to face Jaime. Jaime, she said. Cat. I am glad to see you, he said. As am I, she replied as she reached out and held his hand. He looked down at her hand holding his with surprise. He looked back up at her with a shy smile. I wanted to speak with you, he said. Of course, she replied. The two walked together until they reached a balcony overlooking the Sunset Sea, from which they had a clear view of not only the Sunset Sea, but also the Lion's Peninsula and the castles of Case and Feast Fires. What is it that you wanted to speak of? Asked Caitlin. I wanted to say my apologies. She wasn't expecting that. Apologies? Whatever for? I know that I have been distant ever since we wed. I am sorry for that. She gently reached and held both his hands. It's all right, Jaime. I know that it has not been easy for you. He smiled at that. Tyrion has spoken to you. And Jenna, she admitted. But how are you now? After being in the war, she asked. Honestly. That's a good start. Gods, I'm sounding like Tyrion. Truth be told, I am annoyed that father did not have us join Stark and his campaign sooner. I enjoyed fighting in the war. Fighting at Mimebuttas. And taking on the might of the Triarchy and the Black Fires. Wielding Brightraw for the first time in battle ever since Tommen Lannister II set sail in search of treasures of old Valyria. For the first time in all of my life, I felt a true sense of accomplishment. Something that I accomplished not because I am a Lannister, but because of what I have done, he explained. And how does that make you feel? About our marriage, she asked. She asked with hope. For she did not want theirs to be a failed marriage. She wanted to have a loving marriage. Like what father had with mother. Like what Lysa has with Elbert. And like I would have had with Bran. He took a firm hold of her hands. I know that I have not been a dutiful husband. Nor have I been good to you. But that changes from this day forth. I promise, he said. Caitlin beamed at hearing him say this. She leant in and kissed him on the lips. He returned the kiss. And Caitlin felt his hands on her back as they held the kiss together. Jaime. She and Jaime turned around to see Tyrion, smirking knowingly at them. Father summons us to the dining hall. Caitlin held Jaime's hand as they returned to the dining hall, and sat down with Tywin at the head of the table. We have accomplished more than we set out to do in this war. Though the war has resulted in campaigns and battles that none could have foreseen happening, it has been to the benefit of House Lannister. For House Lannister fought at the final battles, which is more than can be said for the houses of the Reach, of Dorne and the Crown Lands. And because of this, we stand to capitalize on better relations with the North, from which we might pursue a possible alliance. As well as with the Vale and the Stormlands. But in the meantime, we have secured a marriage match between House Lannister and House Targaryen, signed and sealed by the Queen Regent, the Queen Dowager and the Hand of the King. Caitlin stared in astonishment. A marriage match with House Targaryen? Does that mean one of my daughters will be queen? Caitlin turned to Jaime. But before he could say anything, Tywin clarified. Princess Daenerys Targaryen shall wed Jaime and Caitlyn's eldest son, when both come of age. Though it is not the marriage alliance I would have hoped for, it is the best one that has happened to this house in a long time, he announced. After clapping at this announcement, the servants brought dinner and drinks. Caitlin turned to Jaime, just as she noticed Tywin rolling his eyes at Cersei. But, father, House Lannister deserves better than this. You should have pushed for a Lannister bride for Aegon, she insisted. With what? When Eddard Stark's lady wife is a childhood friend of the Queen Regent. And the man himself led the campaign against the Triarchy. And then there is the fact of what he has built across the north and for his allies. Tywin snapped with annoyance. How did this come to be made? Asked Caitlin. After tense negotiations between Father, Elia Martell and Rolla Targaryen, he replied. I would have preferred to have had some say about the future bride of our eldest son. It will be all right, Caitlin. With a mother like Queen Rolla and a good sister such as Elia Martell, she will be an excellent princess of House Targaryen and bride for House Lannister, he replied with a soft and kindly smile. Catelyn smiled in reply as she held his hands. Cat. You may call me Cat, she said as she rubbed her thumbs over his hands. Notes. Jaime stops being so distant with Cat, and together, the two might finally have a happy marriage. Chapter 145, Coming Home. Summary. Tijet returns to his home and reunites his family. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Tijet 19. It has been a year since I left Tarbeck Hall. And since then, so much has changed. Darlessa has given birth to a healthy son. Tyok, heir to House Lannick. And I finally have what I sought for so long. Glory and reputation. And even better, a sword of Valyrian steel. Tijet smiled as he passed through the gates of Tarbeck Hall. He thought that he would have felt the same feeling of home as he would whenever he would return to Casterly Rock. But he did not. For in this place, he still felt a stranger. But he dared not let that dampen his spirits. Not when he and his entourage of knights, squires and soldiers reached the Silver Walls. So called, for when the castle was first built, the battlements were decorated with silver-colored shields which shone in the sun. Not when he saw Darlessa stood at the entrance to the Azure Keep. And when he saw Darlessa, he saw the child she held in her arms. My son. My little Tyok. Tijet spurred his horse faster towards the stables, impatient to greet his wife and to meet his son for the first time. A stable hand took his horse and Tijet swiftly climbed down from his horse and walked fast towards Darlessa. My lord, she greeted. Darlessa, my lady. You are well, he asked before kissing her free hand. I am, my lord. All the better for seeing you. And for you to meet your son. Tijet looked down with a beaming smile. Hello. Hello, my little boy, he whispered. Tyok blinked as he looked up at Tijet. Tijet beamed as Tyok faced him and looked at him curiously. He smiled at Tijet. Oh, he is the cutest little lion in the world. Tijet chuckled happily before taking Tyok in his arms and gently kissed his forehead. Hello, my little son. I am your father, he said. Looking at him with a beaming smile, Tyok eventually smiled back. Tijet chuckled as he walked inside the Azure Keep with Darlessa. How have things been since the war began? In the lands, he asked. Well, you saw the construction on the roads and the farming on the hills, she replied. I did. Who planned and funded this? He wondered with interest as they sat down in his solar. Jaime's wife, Lady Catelyn. She made a trade agreement with the Northerners. And they have built many such improvements such as the Valyrian roads of Essos, aqueducts, dams and terrace farms, she replied. Impressive. Very impressive. Jaime married very well. I saw for myself these roads in Lys and in the Riverlands. Incredible structures and works. They shall indeed be of great benefit to the Westerlands. And resource surveyors that accompanied them from the north had come to Tarbeck Hall. They had uncovered veins of silver and gold, with the potential of gold and silver underneath, she continued. How many potential places? Asked Tijet. 3. 2 gold and 1 silver, she replied. Excellent. Those who took up arms in the war will need to find trades and occupations to provide for their families. And what better than mining? For which the Westerlands is famed for. Have more settlers come to Lannick lands? Asked Tijet. As he asked this, Maester Leo entered his solar. Good day, my lord. Welcome home. My thanks, Maester, he replied with a smile. In answer to your question, my lord, 200 settlers have taken up residence upon the lands. And have been taking up trades in what improvements of industry you have built, said Maester Leo. Good. With the small folk well provided for, in terms of livelihoods and homes, then there will be contentment, peace and order in my lands. This is why Cersei would never have made a good queen. All she thinks of is making all around her fear her. It is true that many fear her father. But not all. Above all, her father is respected. Respect is what is needed to rule and rule successfully. Something which I fear she will never learn. Not when she is to wed and be Lady of Highgarden one day. Is it true, Tijet, that you slew Magor Blackfear? Tijet turned to Darlessa. At the question, he looked down at Tyack, who had awoken again and looked up at him with curiosity. As if he was wondering if he truly did do it. Yes, I did kill him, Tyack, Tijet inwardly said before gently placing him down in the nearby cradle. I did. I slew him at the conclusion of the battle. And I claimed his sword as a prize of war. The sword Blackfear, Tijet replied before he unsheathed the sword in question and held it up to the window for the sunlight to reflect off it. That makes House Lanek the fifth Westerland's house to have one. Houses Crickehall, Marbrand and Westerling have ones. House Lannister of course. And now House Lanek. Tijet turned to Tyack whilst Maester Leo and Darlessa admired the sword of House Lanek. I did all that and more for you, Tyack. That you would grow up to be proud of this house. This house which your mother and I have worked hard to make a house to be proud to be a part of. And you will do greater things when you grow older. I know you will, my boy. Notes. Tijet has returned home and happily meets his son for the first time. And is proud of what he did in the war and claiming the Blackfear sword. Chapter 146, Two Nights of Riverrun. Summary. Brynden and Edmure return home, battle-weary, but proud. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Brynden 16. Bittersweet. It is bittersweet to be returning home. I want to be back home more than anything. But I cannot do such a thing. Not when I am now on the Regency Council. Brynden's feelings of longing for home were mixed. For though he was glad to be back home, he was irritated that his duties as being on the Regency Council meant that he could not remain at home. But he reminded himself of the man Edmure had grown into. Into a young man worthy of the knighthood which he had earned. For both he and Robin Greyjoy were knighted by Rhaegar by personal request of Brynden and Harlon Greyjoy respectively before they had left for home. Rhaegar, Brynden was glad to see, was in a jovial mood, and so he agreed to knight them both. Brynden was proud of Edmure. For his bravery in the battles of Myr, Murmush and Mimebatass, he had undeniably earned the right of knighthood. Brynden felt it was better that men earned their knighthoods from acts of honor, courage and bravery, rather than simply winning a tourney. Or even just taking part in a tourney. Or simply being of noble blood. It is too easy to be knighted these days. People deserve to be knighted for more than just noble birth. The small folk of Riverrun cheered and clapped as they rode through the streets of Riverrun, accompanied by their entourage of knights, squires, soldiers and servants. Brynden looked at Edmure. Glad to be back home. I am, uncle, he replied with a smile on his now sun-kissed face. From spending so much time in the free cities, Brynden was unsurprised at the fact that he was as sun-kissed as a Dornishman. And the gates to the triangular keep opened. Brynden smiled as they rode through. He looked ahead at the main doors. Stood there was Hoster, beaming with pride at his brother and his son. Hoster beamed at Edmure as he climbed down from his horse. Ah! There he is. Sir Edmure, the hero of Riverrun, proudly said Hoster as he patted him on the shoulder. Brynden chuckled at how Edmure flushed at the praise he received from Hoster. Well-earned praise. The war turned young Edmure into a hardened warrior and knight. And knighted by the king. The one good thing he had done before he died. Brother, said Brynden with a smile. Hoster smiled at Brynden before patting Edmure one more time and led him inside the great hall before Hoster turned to Brynden. I am glad to see you both home, brother. Now, tell me. How is he? He is not haunted by bitter memories of the war, is he? He is not. I kept close watch on him since that bloody day at Mimebatass, Brynden replied assuredly. Brynden was quickly reminded of the aftermath of the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Where Hoster was haunted by the memories of what they had seen, what they had done and the horrors the Black Fires had inflicted upon them and how they would ambush them continually through the night and day. It had pained Brynden to see this happen to his brother, but not to himself. He would stare at the walls of his bedchambers for weeks and moons with his mouth opened in shock and his eyes widened in terror. Before Brynden would help him by taking him horse riding around Riverrun and rowing up and down the Red Fork. Slowly, his brother would no longer stare at the walls, after a year of returning home from the war. "And I heard that you are now on the Regency Council," said Hoster as they entered the Great Hall. "I am. Which is one of the reasons why I have come. To bring this back to Riverrun and to its rightful place," he said before drawing Faith from his belt, sheathed in its scabbard. Hoster smiled as he held it up. "It's as beautiful as I remember," he commented. "And was used many times on the battlefield, I can assure you of that," Brindon added. "Of that, I have no doubt. Now, when is it that you return to the capital?" asked Hoster. "Tomorrow. Once I have concluded matters here, and I am sure that Edmure is not troubled by bitter memories as you once were," Brindon explained. Hoster smiled and nodded at that. "Thank you, brother. I know that it is a lot to ask of you, but—" "Say no more, Hoster. Blackfish I may be, but I will always be a Tully of Riverrun," Brindon replied with pride. "Quite right too. A pity that you are on the Regency Council. I was going to have a tourney and feast to celebrate the war's end in Riverrun. And have me there to ruin the competition. No, brother. That is for the young men of today to compete in. I would only make it unfair for all of them," Brindon replied. Hoster chuckled as they sat down in the dining hall. "And how is your leg, brother?" "The gout healed fully. Fully. Though I still feel a little pain in my bones, I have recovered," he said proudly. Brindon smirked before Hoster smirked also. "Now, I wanted to ask. Walder Frey sent many of his brood of weasels into the war. How did they fare?" "Ah," said Brindon with a smirk. "A great culling of weasels, I must say. The Triarchy and the Black Fires did us all a favor. Stephen Frey lives. Though the same cannot be said for many of Walder Frey's sons, grandsons, bastards and grand-bastards. As far as I am aware, at least 20 men bearing the name of Frey are dead. As for bastards and grand-bastards, I know not." Hoster burst out laughing at the answer. 20 Freys. Gods, the Triarchy and the Black Fires have done us a favor, as you have said. I am sure that Walder Frey's tears must be drowning himself right now," he commented. "My tears of sorrow may just join were he to die anytime soon. And, in good news, I have made arrangements for Edmure to wed." "Excellent. But who? From one of the bannermen?" asked Brindon. "Yes. I arranged a match with John Osbracken's eldest daughter Barbara. She is a sweet girl of 10 who I had met only a moon ago. She is witty and sweet and a pretty lass already. I am sure she will make a fine lady of Riverrun one day," said Hoster. "Good. Though that won't go down well with the Blackwoods. But truthfully, they have little to complain about. Especially when one of their daughters was queen to Egon the Unlikely." "When will you tell Edmure?" he asked. "Tonight, once he has had time to rest and eat. He needs to relax for a while before he is told and begins to learn in earnest what it means to be the future Lord of Riverrun and future Lord Paramount of the Riverlands." "Wonderful. Then House Tully's future is secured. And my brother has finally calmed down his ambitious and scheming nature." Notes. Hoster has finally made a match for Edmure, after at last paying attention to what Brindon was saying, just before Brindon returns to King's Landing as a member of the Regency Council. Chapter 147, The Falcon Flies Home. Summary. Elbert returns, exhausted, back home. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Elbert 19. The first thing that came to Elbert's mind when he stepped inside the Crescent Chamber was not of how he yearned for home. How he missed Lysa. How he excited he was to see Harold. But rather, how different the climate was in the Eyrie in comparison to the free cities. I have spent too long in Essos. In the free cities of Myr and Lys. I have endured and put up with the climate of the free cities. With heat so testing that men wearing too small helms and those who did not drink enough water would collapse and faint from the heat. But not here. Not in the Eyrie. Where there are more than enough hearths in each chamber and each room for those inside to keep warm. And always a pleasant and cooling wind to enjoy when stood out on the balcony. Elbert smiled as he stood at the hearth fire in the Crescent Chamber and rubbed his hands together in front of it. Gods, that feels good. I truly needed that. But Elbert turned when he heard the doors open. He saw Uncle John, Lysa and a small dirty blonde-haired boy holding Lysa's hand. Elbert gasped when he saw them. "Uncle John," he said. He walked to his side and hugged him. "Thank the seven you have come home safely," he said proudly whilst beaming at him. "Yes, uncle. And I pray that war to have been my last." "Truly?" asked Uncle John. "You used to wish for wars to fight only 5 years ago," he pointed out. "That was only 5 years ago. Gods! That feels like 5 decades ago." "True, uncle. But I was a boy back then. And now I am a man. Older and wiser. And have seen war for what it truly is," he replied. Uncle John's smile of pride only widened at hearing that. "Well said, dear boy. Well said indeed," he said before patting his back. Elbert turned to Lysa. "Lysa, my love. Gods, I have missed you," he said before hugging her and kissing her soft and sweet-tasting lips. "And are you, Elbert?" she replied as she stroked his face and his rough, scarred and bearded cheek. "How are you?" he asked. "Glad to see you returned. And for you to see your son," she said before beaming down at Harold. Elbert turned to him. He took a knee to face his son, who shyly looked at him before hiding behind Lysa's dress. "Come now, Harold, my sweet. This is your father," she said gently. Harold eventually took a few steps towards Elbert. "Hello, Harold." "Hello, my boy," Elbert said with a beaming smile. Eventually, Harold walked towards Elbert until Elbert beamed as he wrapped his arms around him and gently hugged him. He felt tears in his eyes as he hugged his son. "I was so frightened so much of the time that I would never see you or your mother again. But I promise to make up for all the time I was not with you by spending as much time as I can with you and your mother." Whilst a nursemaid took Harold to the nursery, Elbert walked with Lysa and Uncle John to Uncle John's solar in the moon tower. "Uncle, before we speak of the veil, I should return this to its rightful place," said Elbert before he drew a sheathed talon from his belt. He passed the sword to Uncle John. Uncle John held the sheathed sword up before turning to the mantelpiece above the fireplace. He hung the sword on the rack. The sword's decreed resting place when the sword was not going to war with the Lord of the Uri, he and Uncle John had decided. "I heard that Bronze Yon is now the master of laws." "A fine choice, I might say so," said Uncle John. "As do I, uncle. Though I have no doubt how much he will hate the capital and the intrigues and the Game of Thrones," Elbert said. "Indeed," said Uncle John. "What of House Arryn? What does it gain from our part in the war?" asked Lysa. Elbert turned to Uncle John. "The Queen Regent has agreed to grant me the charters and rights to award Titan's Tower to another once it is fully complete. The honor I have decided to award to a second son you might have," said Uncle John. Elbert and Lysa smiled at that as they held hands. "But you said complete, uncle. What renovations have been made so far?" asked Elbert. "A proper harbor and port have been built. As well as a proper castle and curtain walls. Though it doesn't look like an awe-inspiring castle such as the Uri, it is far larger than what it once was before and is now a place that one can be proud to call home. A few villages have been built in its lands. So yes, it has a definite improvement that the Baelishs had never built. A second son Lysa and I will be well cared for. As the new Lord of Titan's Tower. And head of a new House of the Vale. Thank the Seven for granting House Arryn this mercy. For we have been plagued by civil strife in the Vale for decades and centuries. Especially after the Dance of the Dragons. Where Arryns killed Arryns. So long as that does not happen, then all will be well in the Vale. I would not have any of my children or grandchildren be kinslayers." Notes. Now wiser, Elbert no longer wishes to fight in war, pleasing his uncle for seeing war for what it really is like. Chapter 148, It's Never Too Late. Summary. Baelor and Elia marry. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Baelor 14. This must be the best day of my life. I cannot think of anything better in my life to have happened. Were that I a poet or a troubadour. That I could put how I feel to parchment and into song. For I feel so much for my beloved Elia. Baelor inhaled and exhaled deeply as he stood before the altar of the Seven in the great September of Baelor. He bowed his head to His Holiness, the High Septon, as he walked past. "Your Holiness," he said. "Sir Baelor," replied the High Septon. His Holiness made the sign of the seven before the altar. And as he did, the doors far behind Baylor opened. Baylor gulped as he inhaled and exhaled gently, thinking of all that he was to do. Now that he was to finally wed to the only woman he had ever truly loved in his life. Finally, as the footsteps came closer and closer, Baylor at last turned around. He turned to face Elia, whom was being escorted by her uncle, Sir Lewin. Sir Lewin beamed at his niece, at how she smiled at Baylor. Gods, that smile just melts me. People call me Baylor Bright Smile. And yet, the only reason why my smile feels so bright is only because of her. Just being in her presence just breathes life into me. Elia reached out and took hold of Baylor's hand, while Oberyn, Doran's wife,